the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good afternoon. I'm Peter Cardwell. In for Ian Collins today. Ian is unwell. We wish him all the best, of course. I usually do drive between 4 and 7, but I'm here between 1 and 4 today. Fear not, Kevin O'Sullivan will be here between 4 and 7, and we'll let you know when we know. He's here between 7 and 9. Lots to discuss here on Talk this afternoon, including Baroness Sue Carr, the Lady Chief Justice. She's up to her old tricks again. This time she has reduced the sentences, along with 2 other judges in the Court of Appeal, of Just Stop Oil protesters. Guess what? Because one of them said that he'd stop doing it. Well, if someone's hitting you over the head with a hammer and they stop, do you say thank you? Apparently Sue Carr does. We'll be talking about that. She's the and she comes into another story as well about softer sentencing for minorities. We discussed this yesterday on my show, and it was based on a report in 2017 by guess who? David Lammy. We'll talk about the mutiny in Reform UK as well. The fact that Nigel Farage is being criticised by one of his own MPs. It's quite a feat to have 5 MPs and have them fighting like rats in a sack. We'll talk about that. Nigel Farage berating his rival Rupert Lowe. We heard that on Harry Cole's show yesterday. Rupert Lowe has hit back as well. We'll hear all sorts of stories about the Eurostar in Paris, the fact that it has been delayed, indeed cancelled, because a World War II bomb has been found. We'll talk as well about the Justice Secretary threatening to strip the powers of that quango, and Sadiq Khan's ULEX expansion hurting the high streets, according to a report. We'll ask as well whether 16-year-olds should stop being given access to social media. What do you think about that? Let me know your thoughts on all of those stories. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell. Remember, the main number does 3 things. You can send me a voice note. We'll play as many of those out as we can. Keep them to less than a minute, please. You can also send me a WhatsApp text message or give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Lots to discuss between now and 4 here on Talk. Well, Charlie Downs is with me for the next half an hour. Charlie's a political commentator, and the question we're asking, not just Charlie, but you at home today as well, is Nigel Farage running Reform UK well? We know that the local elections are coming up in many parts of England. Welsh and Scottish elections round the corner. Reform are riding high in the polls. In fact, they're topping many polls, the majority of polls that are coming out. And in fact, Reform UK has found itself in a civil war. Nigel Farage calling his fellow MP, Rupert Lowe, here on Talk, calling him out. Let's take a listen to what Nigel Farage had to say here in the studio to my colleague Harry Cole yesterday.
We are not a protest party in any way at all. That is utterly wrong. Utterly, completely wrong. We are an entirely positive party. Come to any reform event and the positivity, the energy, and perhaps you should come to one or two.
I've been. I came to your one in Birmingham. There were fireworks.
Well, look, do you know what? If I've got a following out there, that's a good thing. If I hadn't, we wouldn't have won any seats in Parliament at all on the 4th of July.
Including Great Yarmouth, I presume you put in that.
There wouldn't have been a cat's chance in hell, would there? Come on, be honest about it.
Nigel Farage saying there wouldn't have been a cat's chance in hell of Rupert Lowe, his party colleague, just one of 4 other MPs in Reform UK. Are they disintegrating, or is this just the way Reform is? Is this to do with Nigel Farage's personality or indeed Rupert Lowe's personality? What do you think, Charlie?
To be honest, I actually think that this story has been massively blown out of proportion. So I read this article before it really hit the news yesterday when it came out, and I thought, OK, Rupert Lowe is clearly, sticking his head above the parapet a little bit here, and he's levelling some, I wouldn't even say they were criticisms, the things that he said. He just said, I don't know whether Nigel Farage is prepared to be Prime Minister. And
he said Reform needed to change from being a protest party led by the Messiah into being a properly structured party with a front bench. That sounds like criticism to me, Charlie. But
again, it's the context that's been stripped away from this. It's the fact that this is in text and, you don't know the way that this was said.
Calling the leader of a party a Messiah is a pretty big criticism. It's withering sarcasm, is it not?
Maybe so. But then this is a party and a area of politics, actually, on the political political landscape that is it's like a magnet for big personalities.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, all of them are big personalities. I mean, James McMurdoch, I think we can probably put to one side because he won his seat. Even he would suggest by a bit of a fluke. But you've got Rupert Lowe as a big personality, no doubt about that. Farage, huge personality. Richard Tice, big personality as well. Lee Anderson, not exactly a shrinking violet. This was probably bound to happen, was it not?
I think you're right. Yeah, I think it sort of comes with the territory. This, and it's not a great look to have this kind of infighting in what is supposed to be the next party of government in Britain. You know, I for one am somebody who is invested in reform, and I want to see them win the next election. And so to see them infighting like this is just really demoralising, and it's not a good look. But I think the thing to remember is, you know, whatever one might want to say about Nigel Farage, he is right about the fact that they wouldn't have won any seats if not for him. It's the strength of his personality, his brand, his history that was able to, you know, act as the kind of foot in the door for reform, I think. And, you know, Rupert Lowe is somebody who I respect immensely. He is my personal favourite MP in Parliament, and I think he'd make a fine Prime Minister. But with that being said, I don't think he should forget where, you know, really who he owes his seat to. And it is Nigel Farage, you know, whether we like it.
Clearly Nigel Farage thinks that too. We're asking the question today, is Nigel Farage running Reform UK well? What do you think? 0344 499 1000. It's interesting, I mean, there have been quite a few usual people who we go to for a comment on stories about Reform UK who are unsurprisingly quite busy today. They've perhaps been told to kind of dial it down a little bit. I wonder as well, maybe this is perversely a good thing actually for Reform UK, because it shows that actually people do have disagreements, and if they have them in public, well, that's more honest perhaps than having them behind closed doors, in the way that maybe Donald Trump and President Zelensky, I'm not comparing the two, I'm simply saying we have another example just a week ago of a very public argument in politics, and it got a big debate going in terms of honesty in politics. Both men were being honest and unfiltered in the Oval Office. Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage, in a very different way, being open and honest as well.
Well, it would be one thing if they were disagreeing over policy, but they're not. This is a personal beef that's coming into the public eye here, which again is just not a good look. It looks petty, it looks childish, it looks especially bad when somebody like Isabel Oakeshott, of course Richard Tice's partner, comes in, wades in and starts calling Rupert Lowe names on this very channel and all of this sort of thing.
I missed that particular interview, I'll have to
Yeah, this was last night with Kevin O'Sullivan. And it's just, all of this just looks very petty. It looks like the sort of thing that people imagine politicians and media types get up to, where it is just squabbling and getting at each other. And I think it's just below us. You know, it should be beneath Reform UK, which I agree with Rupert Lowe. They should be acting like a government in waiting, and I agree with him that they're not. They are still acting like like the underdogs, like an outside voice, when actually they should be acting. If you look at Pierre Poilievre in Canada, for example, he is, you know, representative of a similar phenomenon to Reform in his own country, and he's speaking as if he's already the Prime Minister. The same was true, of course, of Trump before he won the election. I don't necessarily disagree with Rupert Lowe that Farage and co are not necessarily doing that yet. They're not grasping the moment.
Well, Reform UK needs to be more than Nigel Farage. He's a big element of it, and I think we are in agreement that they would not be in the position they are today without Nigel Farage. He is a superstar politically.
But this is the question: can it be? Can it be?
Well, what do you think?
Farage? I don't know. Honestly, because as I've said already, I do think they owe their seats that they won in 24 to Farage and to his brand and to his history.
Has it grown too quickly, do you think? I mean, it's strange, actually, when you think about UKIP, which had Farage, then the Brexit Party, now Reform UK. I mean, they often say, and this is a fair enough thing to say, we're a new party, we're a different party, where Reform UK is in its infancy. But actually, there's a whole legacy there as well, and it's been pretty choppy as well. I mean, UKIP, for example, I think there's something like half of this could be wrong, but it's an awful lot of the MEPs who were elected as UKIP actually didn't end up being UKIP MPs by the end of their time as members of the European Parliament. Rob says, perhaps Nigel and Rupert are creating some news and interest in Reform on purpose. Rob, I think that's probably not the case,
doubt that, no.
But nonetheless, I appreciate that. Having been in politics myself, these things are 99% cock-up, 1% conspiracy. John in Wallington says Nigel Farage will lead Reform to victory at the next election, with or without Rupert Lowe. And another John in London says, so the media are talking about Reform UK again due to Rupert having a little dig at Nigel. It's no big deal. We're a growing movement, and any publicity is good publicity at this stage. It will blow over. We are doing great, says John. And Sally says, hi Peter, nice hair. There we are. I mean, thank you. I must say that Eleni, who is the heron makeup artist who makes me look vaguely human so I don't look like a corpse under the lights, is very much the person you should be praising for that. Right, let's talk about Sue Carr now, because she is the Lady Chief Justice, and I'm very annoyed with her because we now have a third strike from Sue Carr. On the, I think it was the 18th of February, she criticised both Kemi Badenoch and Sir Keir Starmer for daring to criticise a judgment, and this was a judgment in regard to a plan which was there for Ukrainian people to come to the UK. It was a piece of law. Then Palestinian refugees attempted to use it, and she said, and both Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch said that wasn't the right thing to do. Then we have this story on which there's a new line today in regard to softer sentencing for minorities. It was based on a report by, surprise, surprise, David Lammy. This is essentially saying a decision by the Sentencing Council, headed by Baroness Sue Carr, Lady Chief Justice. The Sentencing Council, 14 people, but she's the head of it, and they said that actually in pre-sentencing reports, in the bit of in a report that goes to a judge who can make up their mind about how strong a sentence should be, that actually ethnic data, whether someone's transgender, whether someone is gay, whether someone is part of another minority, that should be taken into account, and softer sentences should perhaps be given as a result of that. That, I think, is ridiculous, iniquitous, and had a big broadside against Baroness Carr yesterday. Well, today she's at it again, because she was sitting in the Court of Appeal, and Just Stop Oil protesters have been given, guess what, softer sentences. One of the reasons for giving a Just Stop Oil a sentence, one of the reasons it has been reduced, one of the people involved is called Anna Holland. She is someone who threw soup over Van Gogh's sunflowers at the National Gallery in London in October 2022. And Lady Chief Justice and other judges said that the sentence had been slightly shorter correctly because Anna Holland had given up taking part in such Just Stop Oil protests. We're rewarding someone for stopping doing something illegal. That is what the Lady Chief Justice has decided, and 6 climate change activists, including the co-founder of Just Stop Oil, have had their sentences reduced after organising various protests, including this large-scale blockade of the M25. We can listen now to Baroness Sue Carr, the Lady Chief Justice, making the ruling.
The sentences imposed in the M25 conspiracy case were quashed, and the following sentences substituted. Roger Hallam, 4 years imprisonment. Daniel Shaw, 3 years imprisonment. Lucia Whitaker Diabro, 30 months imprisonment. Louise Lancaster, 3 years imprisonment. Cressida Gethin, 30 months imprisonment. In the M25 gantry climbers case, the sentence imposed on Gay de Lapp was quashed, and a sentence of 18 months imprisonment substituted. The appeals by Paul Susek, Teresa Higginson, Paul Bell and George Simonson were dismissed. In the Thurrock Tunnels case, the appeals by Chris Bennett, Dr Larch Maxey, Samuel Johnson and Joe Howlett were dismissed. And in the Sunflowers case, the appeals by Phoebe Plummer and Anna Holland were dismissed.
So there we have it. I love how they're called Cressida and one's called Lucia Whitaker Diablo. I wonder how diverse Just Stop Oil is. I wonder how many ethnic minorities and poor people and working class people they have in Just Stop Oil. But there we are. There is Baroness Sue Carr yet again. If only Phoebe and Lucia had been ethnic minorities, maybe their sentences would have been reduced even more, given what Baroness Carr wants to do. Charlie, what's your take on this?
Yeah, the great irony of any of these stories involving Just Stop Oil people being imprisoned is the fact that, of course, the agenda that they represent and that they protest in favour of is what the government's doing already. Like, the idea that that they're somehow fighting the power by saying, you know, we need to reduce our, you know, emissions and our use of fossil fuels and all the rest of it is laughable, because it's like, this is the agenda not only of our government but of every government across the West, every corporation, every university. You know, everybody sings from the same hymn sheet on this issue. So it's almost like, it's like theatre to me, this whole thing.
No, I think they think it's theatre too, especially when they have ludicrous names like Lucia Whitaker Whittaker Diabru.
Well, indeed, they probably are theatre students themselves. There's a powerful crossover between left-wing activism and theatre kids. But,
I have an A-level in theatre studies, I'll have you know. Hard to believe, given that I'm such a shrinking violet. Lots of people getting their views in, particularly on reform. Gary in Shrewsbury says, "Afternoon, Peter. Reform is like any other political party in respect of disagreements from time to time, and anyone that thinks everyone agrees all the time is completely misguided. It's been blown up out of all proportion, and Reform UK remains the best hope for people in this country." Thank you, Gary. Brian says, "Hi, Peter. Of course Nigel is running it well, topping the polls proves it." And Brittany in the USA says, "Hey Peter, Brittany from the USA here. Okay, here's how I see it. Rupert Lowe is a jealous miscreant who wishes he was as popular as Farage, and so Lowe is pouting in the shadows to be heard, even though it's negative. Just my opinion. Great show as always, Peter. Much love," says Brittany in the USA. Thank you. And on the most important part of the discussion today, Bernadette has been in touch and says, "Peter, I'm sorry, Charlie has better hair." So there we are. I think Charlie has better many things, but there we are. Bernadette, thank you for that. Lots more to come. Be sure to use the break to get your call in. We'll take some calls after the break with Charlie. 0344 499 1000.
And I think you'll find that many people in this country think that Keir Starmer was one of the worst prime ministers we've ever had. And if you can find me a tranche of people who don't think that, then good bloody luck to you. You can probably put them on
He's a very unpopular prime minister. But, Mike, the opinion polls show that public opinion actually thinks he's handled the Ukraine situation quite well.
Yeah, but, you know, you can't just hang on to that because everybody knows that you might think he's handled it well. I mean, are you really seriously going to tell me that when you watched him last Thursday in the Oval Office, you didn't sit there and just cringe?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you to everybody who has been in touch. Sue in West Sussex, I'm actually going there in the next few days. Sue in West Sussex says Reform is still in the process of forming itself in readiness for the next general election. Creating a new major political party from nowhere doesn't happen overnight. All parties have their disagreements, and the Farage-Lowe spat is a storm in a teacup when compared with the Conservatives bickering. A week is a long time in politics, and we still have 4 long years to go, says Sue. A Reform voter in London says Farage is built in the Trump mould. Reform UK wouldn't exist without Nigel Farage. I really don't, well, that's a bit garbled, sorry, but big fan of Nigel Farage there, no doubt. And Gary says squabbling, backstabbing, infighting, public spats, disagreements about policy, and no doubt behind the scenes plots to unseat the leader. Sounds like Reform has finally become a mainstream political party. That's a very good one. Yeah. Gary, excellent. That's the one of the message of the day so far. But yes, this is just to remind you, just if you're tuning in, that we're asking the question today: is Nigel Farage running Reform UK? Well, this is after a spat, a civil war, really. Nigel Farage found himself calling his fellow MP Rupert Lowe out here on Talk. Let's have a look at that clip again. This was yesterday during the discussions with his discussion with Harry Cole in the Drive Time programme yesterday. This is what Nigel Farage had to say.
We are not a protest party in any way at all. That is utterly wrong. Utterly, completely wrong. We are an entirely positive party. Come to any Reform event and the positivity, the energy, and perhaps you should come to one or two.
I've been. I came to your one in Birmingham. There were fireworks.
Well, look, do you know what? If I've got a following out there, that's a good thing. If I hadn't, we wouldn't have won any seats in Parliament at all on the 4th of July.
Including Great Yarmouth, I presume you put in that.
Wouldn't have been a cat's chance in hell, would there? Come on, be honest about it.
Well, Chris in Ottershaw has been in touch and says, Peter, perhaps Rupert Lowe should concentrate on the cause of getting our country back to sanity and not campaigning for his own ambitions. It's very damaging. I thought that message from Gary was brilliant. I mean, it just makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And a lot of every political party is a coalition. Maybe this is Reform coming of age, Charlie Downs.
Maybe so. I mean, you know, it is good that these things are happening now, as opposed to, for example, during a general election or, you know, years down the line. It's good that we're hashing these things out a couple of years in advance. That probably is desirable. But whether this will lead to greater level of unity in the party, I think it remains to be seen.
You say we, Charlie. Is that a Freudian slip? Will you be standing for Reform UK at the next election?
I have no idea whether I will be. But I say as a member of the party, I suppose, and as a supporter and as somebody who wants to see the party do well and who respects both Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe immensely, I just hope that it does lead to, you know, a greater kind of stronger platform than before. But will that be the case? I don't know. Actually, it may will prove to do the opposite, which would be disastrous.
Lots of people getting in touch. Hi Peter, I joined Reform 3 years ago when Nigel was not in the picture. I joined because of Ben Habib, Richard Tice, David Bull, Anne Widdecombe, all thanks of course to Talk. So I don't agree with Nigel when he said they would not have been elected if he was not the leader. I think Rupert or Ben should be leader. And Diane Cornwall, this is her first text to Talk, and she also says please bring back Cat of the Week. Lots of people really want to bring it back. We'll see. Alison says, at the next census we should all declare our gender as LGBTQIA ? Our ethnicities as BAME. Then we will all receive the same sentence if we break the law. Big hug, says Alison. Afternoon, Peter. Does Baroness Sue Carr realise these reduced sentences will cause increased far left-wing activism? But of course she would never stand by any so-called far right wing activism. It's a matter of politics and standpoint for loyalty. Well, let's actually just remind ourselves of what David Lammy was saying here, because this was 2017 and he actually penned a review into some of these sentences, and he wrote, these reports, these are about pre-sentencing reports. They're drawn up by the probation service to provide judges with information about the character, the circumstances of offenders. Lammy wrote, these reports assist the court in determining the most suitable method of dealing with an offender. That's correct, and may be particularly important for shedding light on individuals from backgrounds unfamiliar to the judge, because as we know, all judges are by definition racist. This is vital considering the gap between the difference in backgrounds, both in social class and ethnicity, between the magistrates, judges and many of those offenders who come before them. This is the nonsense, isn't it, Charlie, that you can't possibly understand someone else's point of view unless you have, hate the phrase, and it's a load of nonsense, lived experience. If you're not a black person, you can't understand at all what it's like to be a black person, and nonetheless you can't interpret the law to say, which should be blind. Lady Justice is blind. The Lady Liberty is blind. The point is that no matter what your background, no matter what your ethnicity, if you break the law, it should be exactly the same circumstances and you should be sent to prison if you need to be.
I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment, Peter, and I will say that actually at the interpersonal, social level, I do think there is actually something to the argument that there are certain aspects of our identity that are incommunicable, that are certainly, that are unique to our own experience, and that it is, it's very hard for other people to understand if they don't share those kinds of credentials or characteristics or whatever. So, as a man, for example, I find it very difficult to imagine female experience, right? And I don't think that's like a, that's been the case for the entirety of human history, right? That's not a controversial thing to say. But when it comes to enforcing the law, obviously it's nonsensical, right? Because the law is the law, and it applies in the same way to everybody, or at least it should. And so these guidelines that have been published by the Sentencing Council are just absurd. And this is the real story here, I think. The fact that this Quango that was set up in 2010, it's not some ancient venerated institution. This is something that was set up...
And the law can be changed very easily.
It was set up under Gordon Brown, is dictating to MPs and judges how they should enforce the law, which is insane. I mean, this is an unelected, faceless body.
We do want independent judges, though. I don't want political judges, but they're acting politically, I would argue.
Yeah, but it's not like these so-called independent public bodies like the Sentencing Council actually achieve that. If anything, it's the opposite, because they become so thoroughly politicised, because they are presumably occupied by activists, that we do have politicised judges and a politicised judiciary, which is, that spells the death of a democracy, certainly spells the death of a fair legal system, which this country has been so famed for thousands of years. And so, my response to this really is, well, let's look at all of these hundreds of quangos that actually run this country, from the Sentencing Council through to places like the OBR, the Migration Advisory Committee. Let's look at them each, one at a time, and say, okay, are you actually benefiting the country? Are you making this country a better place, better run, better governed? And I think the answer in most cases will be no. These are politicised organs of the state that exist to expand the remit of the state, expand managerial control over the lives of ordinary people, and don't seem to have the interests of those ordinary people at heart. And so I'd say shut them down.
Robin Broadway says, if someone decided to give up serial killing, would Sue Carpet them on day release? Well, I don't think she would. And look, she's got to her position by being a presumably very good judge, and presumably someone who knows an awful lot about the law. But there's just been 3 things so far this year, and this is the 3rd one that the Lady Chief Justice has done, and I am not happy, and I don't think she, through her decisions, in my strongly held personal belief, I say that phrase so she can't sue me, in my strongly held personal belief, I believe that the job that she is doing is not a good one. That's to do with free speech, which is something I'm not sure she agrees with, because she slapped down the Prime Minister, no less, the democratically elected leader of this country, the leader of the opposition, for criticising a judge's decision. We have free speech. That is what we have in this country. We hold that dear. And I want the Lady Chief Justice, the most senior judicial figure in this country, to hold that dear as well. And I have doubt that she does. I'm worried about that. Thank you to Brittany, who's been in touch as well, who says, well, actually, no, we'll come to that in a second. Farage says Neil will never be Prime Minister. His ego will get the better of him. You can't afford to lose people like Ben Habib and Rupert Lowe. Those two could walk into any other front bench. If the Tories can get Jenrick into power, then I'm confident that they will win. Quick thought on that?
It's a very interesting thought. I mean, Jenrick is a very, very skilled operator, and I think he would pose a real threat not just to Keir Starmer, but also to for Reform, because he'd light a fire underneath them that Kemi Badenoch thus far has utterly failed to do. Kemi Badenoch has been useless, and therefore Reform have been allowed to kind of coast along and grow in the polls and have success. More or less unopposed. So I think it would be very interesting to see if Robert Jenrick were to take the reins of the Conservative Party. Actually, I think it might be good for the country, because then we might see a bit of an arms race between Reform and the Conservative Party to kind of outdo each other when it comes to policy and strength of messaging and commitments to actually improving the state of this country.
Very good text here as well on what we're talking about with the judges. If judges don't know what it's like to be black, female, etc., what about black and female judges? Also, do they know what it's like to be a psychotic murderer or a rapist? Oh, I mean, those are great points. Speaking of getting inside people's heads and understanding what people are like, I have a good rule for, I don't understand women and I never will, but I have a good rule for getting on with women, which is never under any circumstances criticise 4 things: their hair, their clothes, their weight, or their menstrual cycle. Don't criticise any of those things. Yes. Don't criticise. Don't even remark upon them unless it's a nice thing to say. Your hair looks nice today. Just don't go down that road. Brittany has been in touch on one of those issues actually, and says, sorry Charlie, but I stand with Peter, and I always will stand with Peter. He has got fuller, livelier hair.
Fuller, livelier
hair.
Goodness me, that's cutting.
It is. Well, yes, very good, very good. Nice pun to end the section with Charlie Downs, the political commentator. Thank you for coming in.
Cheers,
Charlie will actually be on my show tomorrow as well. I didn't know I was doing this show today, but I do know I'm doing my own show tomorrow, and he'll be on the debate desk tomorrow morning. I'm on between 10 and 12:30 tomorrow, and then on Sunday between 10 and 1. Lots more to discuss, including what's going on in Reform UK. We'll talk about that next, and let me know your thoughts as well. 0344 499 1000. The former Reform UK chairman for South Derbyshire, Job West, will be with us in a second with his analysis of what's really going on under the bonnet in that party. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Thank you so much for your company this afternoon. I'm Peter Cardwell, here between now and 4 o'clock, sitting in for Ian Collins, who's not so well. Unfortunately, we wish him well. And then, as I'm identifying for Ian Collins, Kevin O'Sullivan will be identifying as me between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock. So that is the schedule this afternoon. A little bit of a rejig just because of illness. It is that time of the year. I've had the flu myself, which hasn't been so good. Julie has been off as well. So hopefully she will be back next week, and we wish her well as well, of course. Some colleagues not wishing each other well are Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage. Rupert Lowe is the MP for Great Yarmouth, and he is a Reform UK MP, one of just 5, and he has been slagging off Nigel Farage. The brickbats have been coming in the opposite direction as well, including on this station. It was yesterday afternoon when Nigel Farage was on with Harry Cole, my colleague, on Drive Time yesterday, that this row came up. Just to remind you what happened, essentially Rupert Lowe gave an interview to the Mail, the Daily Mail, and he was critical of Nigel Farage. He said that Mr Farage was acting like a messiah. He bemoaned the tight grip on the party, and he even floated the possibility that Rupert Lowe could replace Nigel Farage as leader of Reform UK, and Rupert Lowe saying that he could go on to become Prime Minister. He said Reform needed to change from being a protest party led by the messiah into a properly structured party with a front bench. Well, is Nigel Farage running Reform UK well? Let's remind ourselves what he said yesterday on this station about his party colleague. Remember, there are only 5 of them. His party colleague, Rupert Lowe.
We are not a protest party in any way at all. That is utterly wrong. Utterly, completely wrong. We are an entirely positive party. Come to any Reform event and the positivity, the energy, and perhaps you should come to one or two.
I've been. I came to your one in Birmingham. There were fireworks.
Well, look, do you know what? If I've got a following out there, that's a good thing. If I hadn't, we wouldn't have won any seats in Parliament at all on the 4th of July.
Including Great Yarmouth, I presume you put in
Wouldn't
that.
have been a cat's chance in hell, would there? Come on, be honest about it.
Well, Job West is the former Reform UK chairman for South Derbyshire. He resigned from the party last month. Now, Job is with me now. Job, can you just remind people who may not know or may not remember why you resigned from Reform UK? What were your reasons?
I resigned from Reform because Nigel and Zia are not running the party properly.
You're referring to Zia Youssef there, the chairman of Reform UK.
That's right, yes. The big problems I had was not personally with my own branch, but with the way in which Amber Valley, which is a constituency in the north of Derbyshire, was being treated by the management, which was appalling. It ended up with Alex Stevenson, the leader of Amber Valley, being suspended, and that led to mass resignation from all of the Amber Valley branch, which was, I still think, the best run Reform UK branch in Derbyshire, if not the East Midlands.
Okay, so you clearly weren't happy. Are you still a member of the party, or are you completely gone from Reform UK?
No, I'm gone.
Okay. What do you think of this, Roy? Because whilst your resignation, of course, made the headlines, this is a member of Parliament who is criticising Nigel Farage. Do you see perhaps some similarities?
I'll tell you what I see. I know for a fact that there are many activists, volunteers and branch officers within Reform UK who would dearly love to see Rupert Lowe as the leader of Reform. They don't have any confidence in Nigel Farage, and a lot of them are just treading water as we speak, hoping that something will come along that will make Nigel leave and Rupert take his place.
What's the problem with Nigel Farage? He is clearly a very popular person. He is clearly a very popular politician. He's been elected as an MP now. He's been elected on a number of occasions as an MEP. He's someone who has led Reform UK to being in Parliament for the first time and being a very popular party. In fact, if polling is to be believed, and it's been fairly consistent, very consistent actually over the last, really since Christmas, we've seen that Reform UK is, in polls anyway, the largest party in this country. Surely if the criticism stopped, Reform UK could do very well. Isn't it time for people just to bite their tongues and let Nigel Farage get on with it?
No. You have to stand on your principles. You have to do what's right. That's one of the reasons why I had to resign. I don't trust Nigel Farage. I think he's turning Reform UK into what it was, which is a truly reformation type party to bring about an end to the uni party.
Okay, well, what is wrong with Nigel Farage? What's the you've made clear you're not a fan, but why? What is it that he's done or not done?
Right. Well, for a start, I can only go back to the management of the party. He put Zia Youssef in as the manager of the party, as the chairman for the party, who runs the party. He made a disastrous decision when he did that because people don't like the way that Zia is managing the party. And I'm not talking about the ordinary people who joined up. I'm talking about activists, I'm talking about volunteers, and I'm talking about branch officers.
Okay, what's he doing under Nigel Farage? What is he doing as chairman?
I can't go into specifics. Okay,
give us a general idea.
The general idea is that real reformers are being undermined, that the professionalisation push being pushed by Zia is actually the Toryisation of the party. He's actually trying to bring in professional politicians. He's trying to bring in old Tories, and that goes against the very ethos of what reform was always meant to be about. It was about getting rid of the Conservative Party. It was about getting rid of them and finishing off that one half of the uni party. Yeah, and then we wanted to go on and smash Labour.
Why do you think Rupert Lowe would be a better leader than Nigel Farage? Most people, I mean, you know who Rupert Lowe is, I know who Rupert Lowe is, I've interviewed him many times on the station. I would imagine quite a few of our viewers and listeners would know who he is, but many people wouldn't have a clue who Rupert Lowe is, and the prominence of Reform UK would, I would argue, go down if Rupert Lowe was the leader rather than Nigel Farage, who, love him or loathe him, is a very popular politician.
I think Rupert shows a certain level of integrity that I don't get off of Nigel Farage. He also speaks to a constituency within Reform, yeah, that is more patriotic. We get the feeling from Nigel Farage that he's essentially just a hooray Henry, Tory-eyed city boy. Yeah, he doesn't represent the ordinary middle class and the ordinary working class.
He's been elected. Nigel Farage has been elected by his constituents in Clacton. He is the leader of a party which got 4.1 million votes. He is a popular person. The public do connect with him.
Well, Boris Johnson was a very popular person. So was Tony Blair. That doesn't make them the best men to run the country. Yeah, and it's all very well saying that, oh, well, we shouldn't have had Bojo in hindsight, or we shouldn't have had Tony Blair in hindsight. I'm telling you now, Farage is not the man that the patriotic people of Great Britain want to lead this country. He's not up to the job.
I would be very interested, Job. I would be very interested to talk to those 4.1 million people who voted for Reform UK and ask them if they know the names, literally, of Rupert Lowe, Richard Tice, James McMurdoch, and perhaps even Lee Anderson as well. I mean, Nigel Farage is the person they know. He's a politician who connects with people. You may not like him, but you've got to, and I'm not saying I would vote for him or wouldn't vote for him. What I'm saying is that he has appeal, and that's undeniable.
Is that what our politics is supposed to be based upon? Appeal?
Well, connecting with people, yes, and showing leadership.
No, I disagree. It's got to be about integrity. It's got to be about standing up for principles. If you don't
but it doesn't matter. You can have as many principles as you like, Joe. You can have as many principles as you like, but if people don't vote for you, it doesn't matter.
Well, then we're shafted. That's it. You know, if people can't take the time to find out who their politicians are, then don't complain when you get somebody like Boris Johnson. Don't complain when you get somebody like Tony Blair, and don't complain when you get, if you get, God forbid, Nigel Farage as the leader of this country, because he will not do what he says he's going to do, right? He's a city boy. He's a sellout. He will sell out the people who are out there as the volunteers and the backbone of reform, because I've seen it with my own eyes.
Okay, Job, thank you for your thoughts there. That is Job West there, former Reform UK chairman in South Derbyshire. Job perhaps not showing too much patience there. Voice note, let's have one from Mark on reform, please.
It seems to me that this whole reform row is totally manufactured by the party themselves and by those involved, by Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage. It seems quite obvious that they've learned that in the past, Nigel has been totally vilified by the media, and they've now learned that they're not going to get elected, they're not going to get anywhere unless they keep the media on side. So Nigel's been playing basically centrist dad, not saying anything too controversial, while the one who's been keeping the more right-wing Reform Party voters on side has been Rupert. So this is all just part of that. Have a concocted fallout. Media are all talking about him. There's no such thing as bad publicity.
Mark, I really appreciate you sending in the voice note, but I think you're wrong on a number of points there. I don't think this is concocted at all. I do think it's genuine. It is not within their interest to have this in the public domain. I think a lot of the left are guffawing or laughing about this and thinking, oh, it's all falling apart for reform. Farage is this texter says, is a fantastic disruptor in Parliament, but is not a Prime Minister. Rachel says, I'm really angry with Rupert Lowe. Reform is doing tremendously. They don't need infighting led by such arrogance. He is sabotaging their momentum. What an absolute fool. And Neil says, Cardi P, I'm listening to the clip of Farage last night. It reminds me of the old phrase I was taught as a young salesman, and it was, there is no I in team, and this is where Farage doesn't get it. There is a me, though, is always my point. Ellie says, Peter, can you hear me screaming from here in Essex? I lived in Dubai for 6 years, very different laws from us, but I lived with them as I'd be dealt with harshly if I hadn't, and quite rightly so, talking about our other story today about Baroness Carr. Maggie says, Peter, there would be no reform without Farage. I like Rupert Lowe very much, but he's not Prime Minister material. Nigel has years of experience, whereas Rupert's experience is being the once owner of a football club. And as for Job West, he sounds like a bitter man. Was he ever a real reform supporter? Nigel is the country's favourite. Well, I mean, look, Job West was someone who was, committed enough to be a chairman of South Derbyshire's party of Reform UK. I mean, he certainly was committed. He may not necessarily agree with Nigel Farage, but he put his money where his mouth was, and he volunteered to be a big supporter there. Graham says if Farage leaves Reform, then Reform will implode, just like UKIP did. And Don says, I always smile when people criticise Nigel Farage. He's the only political leader with charisma, and naturally some have never forgiven us for getting out of the EU. Georgina is in London. Georgina, good to talk to you. What's going on here, do you think?
Well, I don't agree with Job West at all. I think it's ironic that now Reform UK have a very serious shot at number 10, that mutiny does seem to ensue. This is not about Nigel's character. It's about having a leader at the helm of this party that can get the job done. And the people have respect for Nigel, and they know he will get the job done and he will work on their behalf. Nigel Farage is the man to do it. He is the helm person, and without Nigel, there is no Reform UK. This has been blown up out of all proportion, and the other parties will love this, and they'll use it as a deflection tactic as to what they're up to. Nigel does not deviate from the plan, and that plan is to work hard on behalf and for the British public, and I can't wait to see him in number 10, and that's where he's going. I was particularly interested with Job West when I put to him that Nigel Farage has appeal, and that is a very, very important thing, and he seemed to deny that. You need to have appeal if you're a political leader, otherwise people won't vote for you. That's part of it. Whether you like it or not, that's part of it. Yeah, well, I feel that, the British public have made their thoughts clear by the amount of members now within the UK Reform Party. Nigel Farage, he is a man who will do what he can for the British public, unlike most politicians, and certainly unlike the politicians we have in government at the moment. It's a case that he puts work in front of, he puts the work in, he gets the job done, and he wants this country to be well again. He wants it to be good and wants it to work. He doesn't need inner bickering and inner fighting. Honestly, this is just ridiculous. Thanks for your thoughts, Georgina. I appreciate that. That's Georgina in London. Amanda, also in London, says Farage, Habib and Lowe need to put aside their differences and come together for the sake of this. It's embarrassing. Chris in Ottershaw says, Peter, I've been involved with UKIP, the Brexit Party and Reform UK since 1994. I know Nigel Farage. I've had many a pint and a fag with Nigel in the early days, but one thing has been a constant over the years. There have always been someone who thinks they could run things better, says Chris in Ottershaw. Chris, 'twas ever thus in every single political party and almost any voluntary organisation. What you've got to remember, I've been involved in politics. I was a member of the Conservative Party. I'm not anymore. I worked for the Conservative government. I'm not a Conservative anymore. But the point is that if you're paid at all, one of my great boss, brilliant boss, a guy called James Brokenshire, sadly no longer with us, he taught me many things. And one of the things he taught me was that in any political party, the people at the top, the MPs, the advisors, the people who are the professional side of it, they are and professional by which I mean they're paid, not how they act, they simply are paid. They are at the top, the tiny, tiny top bit of a very large tree, and there are lots of volunteers. In any voluntary organisation, you've got to keep people happy. You've got to make sure that they're with you, because they're the ones pounding the streets, putting the leaflets through the door, making sure people get to the polling stations, campaigning. And it's a very, very difficult balance, especially when you have people who have very, very strong personalities sometimes and lots of different ideas about how things should be done. We'll talk more about this in just a second. Stay with us here on Talk.
think the most cautious estimates would suggest 2 months. I've seen other estimates suggest Ukraine can fight at least 6 months. One of the last things Joe Biden did before leaving office was to send through a huge tranche of military aid. So Ukraine is stocked up, but not all weapons are equal.
Yes.
Clearly. And some of the most valuable, precious, high-tech stuff is what they'll run low on first. And the most obvious thing is Patriot missiles. Patriot missiles defend places like Kyiv, where I'm talking to you now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Julian in Coventry has texted me, and do you know what, Julian? You've got a really good point, and I should have done this, and I didn't, and it was in my head at the time when I was chatting to Joe West, and I should have asked the question when he brought up, you know, Boris Johnson, Tony Blair. First of all, Tony Blair, love him or loathe him, he had appeal. There's no doubt about that. He got you know, Labour 3 consecutive terms, for goodness sake. Boris Johnson, everybody knew what Boris Johnson was like. Boris Johnson's character and his conduct in Number 10 weren't exactly a surprise. We knew exactly what he was like. It didn't come as a shock that he was, you know, a bit different from conventional politicians, to put it mildly. And Julian makes a really good point, and I'm going to take this 100% on the chin, Julian, and I'm also going to read it out. Afternoon, Peter. Disappointed you didn't ask that ex-Reform chairman with the obvious chip on his shoulder how did it take him to realise all of the character insults of Farage only last month when he resigned? As far as I can see, Farage hasn't changed his personality for years. Julian, that's a really good point. He knew what he was getting with Nigel Farage. He joined the party when Nigel Farage became leader. He was probably, I don't know about when Job was a member, but I presume it was before Nigel Farage took over, which of course wasn't that long ago, but a year ago. So yeah, it's a very, very good point, Julian. And the next time I do such an interview, I will keep that all in mind. So thank you for that. Mark in Lincolnshire. Mark, what do you make of this?
Hi there, Peter.
Hiya.
Hiya, mate. Yeah, I mean, my view, I've aired this a few times now. Obviously, as you know, I didn't bother joining Reform. I ended up joining UKIP.
You're a member of UKIP then, right? Or not, a rival to Reform. So what do you make of Farage, and do you think this is a big deal?
Well, the thing that makes me laugh about all this is when you're having people, you know, these Reform voters on, that are doing the exact thing that Rupert Lowe was kind of saying, you know, this messianic thing, because they deify this man, and they're going to be let down. I can see it coming a mile away.
But isn't it logical that, you know, there are loads of political leaders who people deify? I mean, Tony Blair, for example, was mocked for being the sort of vicar of St Albans, got a messianic figure. Boris Johnson was going to be the man who would win the 2019 election, and he did, and he brought success. And, you know, Nigel Farage has been, love him or loathe him, I mean, he has been a successful political leader. He has been a very influential political leader.
No doubt at all, Peter, but you're missing the point here. The point is, people are turning to Reform and wanted to turn to Reform because they wanted to step away from that kind of stuff, because they've been let down so many times. And this is the problem. They're now falling into the exact same trap again. And that's why I ended up joining UKIP, because I'm not going to go down that path again. I don't, you know, I would love to see UKIP win the election. It's not going to happen. I'm not an idiot, you know. However, I can't, in all good conscience, support somebody who I know is going to do the exact same thing as the Tories have done.
Do you honestly think Nigel Farage would be a carbon copy of, I don't know, Rishi Sunak?
Perhaps not Rishi Sunak, but he's kind of in a similar vein to Boris Johnson. Mm-hmm. You know, that kind of messianic, oh, I'm wonderful, I'm great.
But you've got to have that confidence, don't you, to be a successful political leader? You've got to say, look, I am the guy or woman to run the country. I am the person who can fix all this. I can, you know, cure your lumbago. I can do everything for you. And actually, if they want to make Reform UK more professional, because, I mean, they got 4.1 million votes. The Lib Dems, as I'm sure you know, Mark, got 600,000 votes fewer. They got 3.5 million. They got the Lib Dems 72 MPs, Reform UK 5 MPs. You need a professional organisation. You need to be able to have people who know how to spread the votes out, to campaign correctly. You need that professionalism, don't you, if you're going to be successful in the system that we have?
Yeah, of course you do. I just think that, you know, you're looking for a leader. The way I see this country, we have one more shot at this. Yeah, if we end up with the wrong party again, we are done as a nation. That's my wholehearted belief. So therefore, I'm going to scrutinise the living crap out of pardon my language,
That's okay.
but I'm going to scrutinise the living heck out of whoever I think is going to be the Prime Minister.
Yes.
And Farage doesn't cut the mustard. I'm sorry.
I wouldn't worry, I said scroots yesterday on air, and apparently you're allowed to do that. It's not an Ofcom banned word, so there we are. Mark, thank you. That's Mark in Lincolnshire. Let's hear from Jerry in Newcastle before the 2 o'clock news. Jerry, what would you like to say?
Hi, Peter. In relation to Joe West's criticism, if Reform was to win a majority, it would have over 300 brand new MPs who really don't even know where the toilets are in Parliament, let alone anything else.
Yep.
Only 5 MPs with any parliamentary experience. They'd have to fill a minimum of 135 government posts.
Yep.
They've got a very, very complicated in terms of legal and parliamentary procedures in order to reform what they want to reform.
Yep.
They are going to need somebody who knows their way around Parliament, otherwise they're going to struggle. So I agree with Zia Yusuf that they are going to need experience from ex-Tories in order to have a chance to govern, because otherwise, potentially, they could just implode.
That's a really interesting point, but what would you say to people like Mark in Lincolnshire who says actually no, or indeed Joe West, who says we actually don't want the ex-Tories. The Tories have failed. The Tories had 14 years. They screwed up the country in the minds of many Reform UK voters that, OK, there are people who can guide us elsewhere. We don't need to necessarily, as Reform UK, take on a lot of people who have failed.
Well, there are a lot of Tories who really did want to do good things, but they couldn't because they couldn't get them into the positions to do things. So, I mean, Sunak was probably okay-ish, but his major failing was that he could not resolve the split in the Tory party.
Yeah.
That was his fundamental failing, because he couldn't get any legislation through on the small boat.
Yeah.
That was meaningful because the left of his party wouldn't vote for him.
Jerry, I think you make some really good points, actually. Really, really interesting. Please give me a ring again in the future. And I'll just tell you one thing before you go, Jerry. I've been in and around Parliament for 15 years. Have you been there yourself? Have you had a look round?
I've been round once, yeah.
I tell you something, I've been in and around Parliament for 15 years in many different capacities. The other day, I asked one of the lovely doorkeepers who keep us all right where the loos were, because I was lost. So finding the loos is sometimes not the easiest thing, Jerry. Listen, thanks for your call. I really appreciate it. That's Jerry in Newcastle there. Lots more on this. We're going to talk more about this in the next hour. We've got Charlie Rowley, political commentator, former special advisor. He's going to be there. We're going to talk about two-tier sentencing and net zero as well. We'll take more of your calls, texts and tweets and answer the question, is Nigel Farage running Reform UK well? What do you think? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Stay with us.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, a very good afternoon. This is Talk. I am not Ian Collins. I'm Peter Cardwell, in for Ian, who is sadly unwell. Hopefully he'll be back on Monday. And actually, in a couple of hours' time, Kevin O'Sullivan will be in for me on Talk Drive between 4 and 7. Lots to discuss, including civil war in Reform UK, because Rupert Lowe, who's one of the 5 MPs, he's taken a broadside at Nigel Farage. We'll be replaying what Nigel Farage said yesterday as well. Also, softer sentencing for minorities was based on a report by David Lammy. A development in that story we discussed in some depth yesterday. Baroness Carr, Sue Carr, she's the Lady Chief Justice, and yet again she is at the heart of another story, not just in regard to the softer sentences and the Sentencing Council's ludicrous decision that has somehow united Robert Jenrick and the actual Justice Secretary Shabnam Mahmood. She says it's rubbish and two-tier and should be reversed. And the fact that Baroness Carr, Sue Carr, the Lady Chief Justice, has been involved in an appeal which has meant that Just Stop Oil protesters, you know, those people lovely people who throw paint, who throw soup over priceless paintings and, you know, block the M25 when people are trying to get to work and things like that. Well, their sentences have been reduced, because some of them anyway, because they were unduly harsh. Well done, Baroness Carr, yet again standing up for her principles, I'm sure, whatever they happen to be. We will discuss more on that. We've got Charlie Rowley in a second, who's a political commentator, but I want your views as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV or follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a voice note. We've had some of those already. You send it through WhatsApp. Keep it to less than a minute if you would. You can send me a WhatsApp text message as well, or give me a ring on the main number 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss here on Talk in the next couple of hours. Stay with us. Well, the messages are coming in thick and fast. Let me read just 4 of them. Louise in Manchester says, I joined Reform a couple of years ago after the Liz Truss versus Rishi leadership race. Richard Tyson Reform was the reason I joined, not Nigel. Not all Reform members are dazzled by Nigel, says Louise in Manchester. Louise, that's a very, very good point. It's a strong one, and actually a number of people have made the a similar thought. A person saying joined because of Ben Habib and Richard Tyson. Nigel wasn't even on the scene when I joined, which is perfectly fine and a perfectly valid reason. But the fact is, and Nigel Farage knows this, that, and I think it is basically a fact, that Reform UK would not have won 5 seats if Nigel Farage had not been leader. I mean, love him or loathe him, he has appeal. He is someone who connects. I would say during my lifetime, actually, there's probably been about 5 political figures, let's see if I can remember them, who have connected with people. Now, I do not like the majority of these people, but they connect with voters. Tony Blair connected with voters, no doubt about that. Boris Johnson did, Nigel Farage, Bill Clinton and Donald Trump. There's no doubt that those 5 political figures connected with voters in a way that others just don't. And it's not because they're bad people, it's not because they're bad leaders necessarily, it's not because they're bad politicians, it's just because they don't have that sort of political X factor. But a lot of this has found that Reform UK has found itself in a war of words, certainly. Nigel Farage called out fellow MP Rupert Lowe. It was actually live here on Talk yesterday, just shy of 24 hours ago on Harry Cole's Drive Time programme yesterday. Let's just take a listen, just remind ourselves what Nigel Farage had to say.
We are not a protest party in any way at all. That is utterly wrong. Utterly, completely wrong. We are an entirely positive party. Come to any Reform event and the positivity, the energy, and perhaps you should come to one or two.
I've been. I came to your one in Birmingham. There were fireworks.
Well, look, do you know what? If I've got a following out there, that's a good thing. If I hadn't, we wouldn't have won any seats in Parliament at all on the 4th of July.
Including Great Yarmouth, I presume you put in that.
There wouldn't have been a cat's chance in hell, would there? Come on, be honest about it.
Lots of people getting in touch about this. Claire says, as a member of Reform UK, I feel that if the party is going to take on defector MPs from the Conservative Party, it is just going to bring in the same hostile factions that existed in the Uni Party. This is a phrase I keep hearing again and again, the Uni Party, this idea that, you know, Labour Conservatives and the Lib Dems are the same. This is something that a lot of people feel very strongly about. It's going to cause the same old problems of infighting, and this is why I'm against any coalition at any time with a busted Conservative Party. George says other parties are just sore that reform of a leader who is a leader. Give me a break. Keir, Kemi and Ed couldn't run a bath, says George. Graham and Bushy says on the other story we're talking about, which we'll talk about with Charlie Rowley in just a second, on Baroness Sue Carr and what she's been up to at the Sentencing Council and reducing the sentences on appeal of Just Stop Oil protesters. Graham says, are we surprised that the David Lammy report on sentencing is all wrong when we know he's no mastermind, says Graham and Bushy. Please, I implore you, not before 4 o'clock and not during Kevin O'Sullivan's programme, but at some stage, if you have 7 minutes of your life, go on YouTube, look up David Lammy, Celebrity Mastermind. You will not be disappointed. All I have to say is Red Leicester. Now then, Charlie Rowley is a political commentator, former special advisor in the Conservative government. Charlie, great to have you with us. What do you make of this Reform UK civil war?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because the party are ahead in the polls consistently. They've polled ahead over the last few weeks and months. And with that vantage in the polls comes greater scrutiny. And so, we know that there's some big personalities there. Nigel, obviously Richard and Rupert.
Lee Anderson's no shrinking valley either, is he?
Exactly. So, there's always going to be, I think, division. What is more interesting to me is just about the language. I don't think there's anything wrong calling Reform a protest party. Nigel's obviously interpreted that completely differently and thought that, maybe Rupert was talking it down, when actually they are a bit of a protest movement. There's actually nothing wrong with that. They are the disruptors. They are wanting to bring reform to the UK. That's
look how successful it's been for Donald Trump to be a disruptor. And I don't think Nigel Farage would deny that per se, but this is not a good look, is it?
No, certainly not having a sort of different view in public. And you and I will both know that, in a slick party operation machine, you want to, any interview that you go out and do, you want to make sure you've got your lines to take. You want to talk down any kind of division and just sort of say, well, I think what Rupert actually meant was this, because, we're both united in doing X, Y, Z. So you want to sort of highlight all of your positives and all of the things that you are united about. I
remember just talking about lines to take, which is quite literally an email that comes through from any political party saying, what the party political position is on a certain thing. If there's a developing story, they send it out, they let you know what it is. When your old boss, Michael Gove, said that he took cocaine, I had to have a discussion with my boss to make sure that he hadn't taken cocaine. I said, I'm sorry, I've got to ask you this question. Have you at any stage taken illegal drugs? He said he hadn't, and I said, so the line to take is that you didn't take any lines.
Well, as former spads, you have to do what you have to do to try and make sure.
That's it. And I wonder who's advising Rupert Lowe in all of this.
Well, just taking back to Michael, I mean, I can assure you after that interview, I was the only Charlie in his office after that.
I like it. I like it. Very good. Very good.
But
yes.
You're right. It seems as though all the MPs in Reform, there might not be that structure there, that they are freelancing, that because there's momentum behind maybe them as individuals, because they've all got quite big personalities. There might be a bit of freelancing going on there. There might be a bit of tension at the top. But what we do know, everybody knows, is that divided parties don't get very far when it comes to elections. So in the run-up to May, they're going to have to present themselves as obviously a group of people who are very united, that know exactly what they want to do to take the country forward, to reform the UK in all the areas that they say that they want to do. But they can't do it if they've got only 5 MPs. And if those MPs are pulling at different directions, then I don't think it would bode too well.
Let's talk a little bit now about Just Stop Oil and Baroness Sue Carr. She is the Lady Chief Justice, and there have been 3 things that she's done in the last few weeks that have really annoyed me. One is that she criticised Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch for criticising a judge, and she said that this is something they shouldn't have done, essentially. This was an argument that was made that a Palestinian family should be allowed to come to the UK under legislation for Ukrainian refugees to come. That is something that both Keir Starmer and Kemi Badenoch said the judge had made the wrong decision, that a wrong decision had been made, and Baroness Sue Carr essentially said they shouldn't have criticised the legal system and should stand up for the rule of law. They should stand up for the rule of law, but we also have free speech in this country, which Baroness Sue Carr may have missed somewhere along the way. Then she's involved in the Sentencing Council. She is the head of the Sentencing Council, which has 14 people on it, and they have decided based on a report by David Lammy, that softer sentencing for minorities is something that should happen. Now, as a Court of Appeal judge today, Baroness Carr has been involved in the Just Stop Oil criminals who have broken the law by blockading the M25, who have thrown soup on priceless artworks, or at least the glass in front of priceless artworks, and she's reduced their sentences. Maybe if they're ethnic minorities, their sentences would be reduced even further. Let's remind ourselves what the Lady Chief Justice said when she was making the ruling about these Just Stop Oil criminals.
The sentences imposed in the M25 conspiracy case were quashed, and the following sentences substituted. Roger Hallam, 4 years imprisonment. Daniel Shaw, 3 years imprisonment. Lucia Whitaker de Abro, 30 months imprisonment. Louise Lancaster, 3 years imprisonment. Cressida Gethin, 30 months imprisonment. In the M25 gantry climbers case, the sentence imposed on Gay de Lapp was quashed, and a sentence of 18 months imprisonment substituted. The appeals by Paul Susek, Teresa Higginson, Paul Bell and George Simonson were dismissed. In the Thurrock Tunnels case, the appeals by Chris Bennett, Dr. Larch Maxey, Samuel Johnson and Joe Howlett were dismissed. And in the Sunflowers case, the appeals by Phoebe Plummer and Anna Holland were dismissed.
So what happened there was that quite a number of these activists, 16 of them, said that their sentences should be reduced. Now, in fairness, 10 of them had those appeals thrown out, but 6 of them, including the co-founder of Just Stop Oil, had their sentences reduced by Baroness Carr and Mr Justice Lavender and Mr Justice Griffiths. We have free speech in this country. I think that is the wrong thing to do. What do you think, Charlie?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it takes a certain somebody to be able to unite the Conservatives, the Labour Party and Reform, and probably the Lib Dems, I don't know, when she sort of, first of all, as you say, overturned a decision to allow somebody from Gaza to apply for a Homes for Ukraine scheme to stay in the country. That's just clearly not what it was set out to do. That's clearly...
She didn't do that herself, but she was saying the criticism of that shouldn't have come from the lips of Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer. And, I mean, she's the Lady Chief Justice and doesn't appear to believe in free speech, and that worries me.
Sure, exactly. And I think this is another example of, somebody siding with people that think it's clearly okay to go to the M25, to blockade traffic, to throw paint and deface our national heritage, to block ambulances and public emergency vehicles that need to get to people, ambulances, firefighters, the police, that are responding to actual problems in this country.
To say nothing of people getting to work, to say nothing of people who needed to get medication on time, to say nothing of people who needed to get to exams and so on. And today, during the hearing, 24 JSO supporters stood up, turned their backs on judges while wearing white T-shirts with the words corruption in court. Now, there's absolutely no suggestion that any of these 3 judges is corrupt in any way, but they were suggesting it anyway. And interestingly, I mean, one of the appeals that was dismissed as well, was dismissed by Lady Carr, and correctly so. This woman, Anna Holland, she threw soup over Van Gogh's Sunflowers at the National Gallery in London in October 2022. The ruling was... it was upheld today, but the appeal was dismissed. She said that Anna Holland's sentence had been correctly slightly shorter than it would have been otherwise, because Anna Holland had given up taking part in such Just Stop Oil protests. Now, I don't know about you, Charlie, but when someone is hitting you over the head with a hammer and they stop, you don't say thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, look, everybody has a right to protest in this country. No one is saying that the people that are Just Stop Oil, and I cannot stand Just Stop Oil as a movement, but they have a position. They're entitled to air it in a way in which everybody else is entitled to protest. But what the actions of Just Stop Oil and the people that take part in those protests, they go beyond that. They commit criminal damage. They do all the things that we've just talked about in terms of preventing everyday hardworking people go about their daily lives. The reason why they're sentenced and the reason why these people end up in prison is, yes, because of the criminal acts that these people make, and also to deter other people for thinking that it's okay to go to art galleries, to, as you said, throw orange paint over a Van Gogh sort of sunflower, to derail our national infrastructure. These people need to be told that if you do that, and the criminal justice system needs to send a very clear signal to people who might even be thinking about taking part in any of this kind of activity. Don't do it. You'll go to prison. You'll have a criminal record. It's not your right to stop everybody else of hardworking UK citizens who get up every morning, who have a job to go to, that might be in our public services, that might be responding to actual crimes, actual health crises.
Or just making money for the country and themselves, which is a perfectly legitimate thing to do. And they were being stopped by doing it by these thugs, by these criminals.
Exactly. And that's exactly what they are. You become criminals. You become this. I mean, who on earth, do they think they are? That they've got this self-entitlement to be able to just go out of their front door, meet up with their friends, to sit and glue themselves to a road to prevent, ambulances getting to people that need them. These people are a risk to society, which is why they get the sentences which they do, which is why I think most people will be appalled that their sentences.
They also just have stupid names, Charlie. They just have stupid names, like Lucia Whitaker de Abreu. It's just a stupid. I'm not saying she should be imprisoned simply for having a stupid name. I'm just pointing out that it's a stupid name.
Well, and I don't think you have to look too far to know that these are people that might be, have read probably a number of books, probably fantasies, as well as left-wing literature. But they are probably middle-class people. That have got
I wonder how diverse Just Stop Oil is. I wonder how many working-class people there are in Just Stop Oil.
Exactly. And how many of the people within Just Stop Oil realise that their actions are actually impacting some of the poorest people in our society by increasing their energy bills, or by having whatever it is that they want that's going to stop hardworking people that might be at the very bottom, that work however many jobs to make all ends meet. It's Just Stop Oil that are preventing those people going about their day-to-day to have as free and fair a life as they can. So Just Stop Oil, I've got a lot of questions to ask.
Charlie, thank you. And maybe Lucia Whitaker de Abreu, maybe she is really working class. Maybe she wears a flat cap. Maybe she's got some coal in the bath. You just never know. Maybe she is very working class, but I'm going to take a punt and say no. Charlie Rowley, thank you very much indeed there. Charlie's a political commentator, former special advisor. Dawn in Chelmsford says the reduction of sentences of the Just Stop Oil offenders is just one more reason to be concerned about the UK. We're on a slippery downward road, and who knows where this will end. Let's call a spade, says Gary. If Reform get rid of Nigel Farage, then it's all over for them. All I can say about Baroness Carr after today's resentencing, because sentences were too harsh, I hope she sits in the appeals of the people jailed for hurty words, says this person. Amanda says Farage and the negative things people say about him. Just comparing with Trump and what was said about him, Farage will get things moving exactly like Trump is doing. Matthew says all this fighting in Reform UK is immensely frustrating. The stakes are far too high for them to be falling out. If Reform do not get their act together, lose the next general election, then the UK is on its way to being an Islamic nation. Whether that's good or bad, I'll leave it to you. Graham of Welling says, unfortunately, Rupert Lowe believes his own press. He has been a great MP for Reform UK, but is now getting a God complex due to Elon Musk. I don't understand the doubters saying he hasn't got what it takes when he has been the most influential political figure of our time. No Farage, no change, says Graham. And just finally, Louise says there are some Conservative MPs that I think would be good in Reform UK. Jonathan Gullis, for example, Miriam Cates, and a few others from the Red Wall. But apart from that, no, a lot are too liberal and institutionalised. Let us know what you think. Do you agree with Louise? We've a lot of calls coming in as well. You can add your voice to that. 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
think all the people it's aimed at actually feature in it, which is her mates. And she's one of these people that goes on about, I've got loads of friends, and we've all met someone like this. I can think of one person right now who's always going on about, he's got lots of mates, he describes everyone as a mate, he's a famous person.
Yeah.
He hasn't got a friend in the world. And she's very much one of those. And the body language between them, it's such a tense atmosphere in that kitchen of hers.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Lots of tweets coming in as well. Thank you for sending them to @talkTV, or you can follow me at Peter Cardwell, of course. Ollie says the man who should be heading up Reform UK is the now vindicated and honourable Ben Habib. The infighting is unseemly. I don't believe Nigel Farage ever seriously wanted to become Prime Minister anyway. Really? I'm not sure I agree with that. Ali says, wow, Zia Youssef is bringing former Tory MPs into Reform to give it a more professional base. It sounds like a great idea. There's a lot of former Tories who resigned because the Tories went too far to the left. Marco Longhi, for example, perfect for Reform. That echoes what one of the texters said a minute ago. Billy says, what a crazy thought there from Job West earlier. He says Farage is an out-of-touch city boy and that he endorses Rupert Lowe as a man of the people. Rupert Lowe is an extremely wealthy multimillionaire that has nothing in common with the average person. But does that matter, actually? Because it goes back to my earlier point about politicians connecting. People like, Boris Johnson went to Eton, loads of money, now a multimillionaire. He connects with people in a way that lots of MPs who have maybe similar backgrounds to a lot of their voters don't. So it's a very, very interesting one. Mick in Ely says, I'm a member of Reform UK with a sinking heart. Farage has got something up his sleeve. You do know Rupert Lowe has intimated he will be off if Farage doesn't start acting on things. Very interesting thoughts there. Les says, what's wrong with these people? Reform UK have the chance of a lifetime to save this country, and the last thing we need is petty infighting. Rupert Lowe is out of order. He would be an amazing Home Secretary, but isn't Prime Minister material. Another person, Phil, says Rupert Lowe would be perfect as Home Secretary. Nigel Farage must stay as leader. Well, we'll return to that debate, but I want to talk about softer sentencing now for minorities. This is an idea that was brought forward by the Sentencing Council. Our old friend Baroness Carr, Sue Carr, she's head of that. 14 people on it, including luminaries such as the head of the Crown Prosecution Service and also someone called Joe King. I promise you, Joe King. So hopefully they are joking about this softer sentencing report. It was based on an original idea by guess who? David Lammy. Yes, really, the Foreign Secretary who wrote a report, and in it he said these reports, talking about pre-sentencing reports, which are used to drawn up by the probation service to provide judges with information about the character and circumstances of an offender, obviously, before they bring a sentence down. And sometimes there are bits of information in those that are really important. But David Lammy says these reports assist the court in determining the most suitable method of dealing with an offender, and may be particularly important for shedding light on individuals from backgrounds unfamiliar to the judge. This is vital considering the gap, Mr. Lammy wrote, between the difference in backgrounds, both in social class and ethnicity, between the magistrate judges and many of those offenders who come before them. Well, let's talk to Joseph Chivers, who is head of Chambers and a practicing barrister at the JSC Chambers law firm. Joseph, thank you for joining me today. I don't know about you, but I want a judge to make a decision based on the crime and based on the punishment that fits the crime, not on things such as things that an offender can't actually change, like their ethnicity, for example. What do you think?
Thanks for having me on, firstly. I would agree with you. These guidelines seem to be based on essentially factual assumptions that a lot of people would disagree with, namely, if you are from an ethnic or a minority background, you have a more difficult life. As you say, it should essentially be based on the circumstances of the crime and the circumstances of that specific offender, not these assumptions about whether or not society is institutionally racist, etc., which many people don't agree with.
It's a very good point, and actually, I mean, we can't make assumptions based on people's ethnicity. For example, I mean, I worked at the BBC at Newsnight years ago, and there was a young kid in on work experience, a young black man, and I'm making the point that he was black because it's pertinent to the story, and there was a story about knife crime, and one of the producers said, maybe you could help us with a story on knife crime, and he said, I'm sorry, I don't know much about knife crime, I went to Eton. And you sort of think, well, you know, we just can't assume that people are poor because they're black. I mean, that in itself is racist, or that you've had a hard time in life simply because of your ethnicity, or because you're transgender, or because you're gay, or whatever. And I do worry about this. Sue Carr is an interesting character, the Lady Chief Justice. I think she has erred in a number of ways over the past few months. We talked about her slamming the Prime Minister and Leader of the Opposition for daring to criticise a judge. I just see a series of decisions here that I'm quite worried about. What does the legal profession think of Sue Carr?
I can't speak for the whole legal profession, but I think politicians are entitled to criticise the actions of judges. I understand from the point of view of a judge, they have to be apolitical. They can't wade into political debates. But from what I can tell, I don't think there was any reason not to criticise these guidelines. I don't think any politicians have overstepped the mark there. Yeah, I don't see what they've done wrong in making comments about the sentencing guidelines.
Tell me your thoughts about Just Stop Oil and the decision today. Now, there were 16 of them, and in fairness, 10 of the appeals were dismissed, but 6 of them had their sentences reduced on appeal. There are many people who say that the example that was made of Just Stop Oil was necessary to discourage other people from doing the same thing and to send a message to the public that their type of protest is actually something that should not be encouraged. What do you think, Joseph?
I think it's right that there's a deterrent effect. I personally think, this is just my philosophical view, that the main purpose of sentencing is actually to give the criminals what they deserve. But it is right that there is some account taken of the need to deter other people. These protests are extremely disruptive. Just Stop Oil could instead lobby politicians to pass the kind of laws that they want. My understanding is that the majority of the country probably wouldn't agree with the sort of policies that they would propose. But yes, in answer to your question, I think it is right that there was a deterrent element to the sentences.
Joseph, thanks for your thoughts. That's Joseph Chiffers, who is head of Chambers, a practising barrister as well at the JSC Chambers in England and Wales. They cover Manchester and Liverpool, so thank you to him. There's a lot of people getting in touch about really this reform story is a very, very big one. A lot of people, of course, a lot of our viewers and listeners have an interest, some members, of course, of Reform UK as well. Let's just remind ourselves what Nigel Farage said yesterday on Harry Cole's programme on Talk in regard to this row between him and one of his MPs, Rupert Lowe.
We are not a protest party in any way at all. That is utterly wrong. Utterly, completely wrong. We are an entirely positive party. Come to any reform event and the positivity, the energy, and perhaps you should come to one or two.
I've been. I came to your one in Birmingham. There were fireworks.
Well, look, do you know what? If I've got a following out there, that's a good thing. If I hadn't, we wouldn't have won any seats in Parliament at all on the 4th of July.
Including Great Yarmouth, I presume you put in that.
Wouldn't have been a cat's chance in hell, would there? Come on, be honest about it.
Well, that is something that a lot of you have been reacting to, including this voice note from Ian.
I think Farage is the man to lead the Reform Party into the next election. And I think Lowe should look at the longer game. You know, he would obviously have a cabinet position. Who knows what Farage's long-term plans are? Maybe he'd be a one-term Prime Minister and then decide that's it, he's had enough of politics and Lowe might be the successor.
Ian, I think that's a very good point. Sometimes politics is just a waiting game. Sometimes a lot of different jobs are just waiting games for, you know, big beasts to stand down. Anyway, lots to discuss, and net zero is what we're going to discuss next. Sadiq Khan's ULEZ expansion hurting the high streets, but clearing up some of the air, especially in the outer London boroughs. What do you think of that? Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. We'll speak to Susan Hall, who's a London Assembly member, Harrow councillor, who of course stood against Sir Sadiq Khan, Knight of the Realm, who is the Mayor of London. And isn't that marvellous? Stay with us.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
We're asking the question today of you, is Nigel Farage running Reform UK well? That is because one of his MPs, and there are only 5 of them, one of his 4 other MPs, Rupert Lowe, has criticised his leadership, says he treats himself like a messiah. There's clearly trouble in paradise. Philip is in Dorset, has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Philippa, what do you make of this?
Well, I think Nigel Farage is going to be our next UK Prime Minister because at the moment he's the only one that seems to be talking any common sense and is authentic.
He's ahead in the polls as well, and he's got 4.1 million people voting for reform. So should Rupert Lowe sit down and shut up?
Yeah, well, yes, of course. I mean, he supposedly supported Nigel from the beginning. Why doesn't he just continue to do that so they can build momentum and actually get into a position of power where they've got more MPs to actually lead?
But if you're in a political party, Philippa, if you're in a political party and you think, actually, hold on a second, we're high in the polls here, we're doing well, we're looking as if we might be either the next government or part of the next government, actually, the guy we've got at the top is the wrong person. I need, in all conscience, to make my views clear on that. Is that not something that is the right thing to do if you really feel that?
Well, nobody did it in the Labour Party when Keir Starmer came to power. He's the wrong person to be leader of that party.
I can't believe you say that, Philippa. I think he's a wonderful man. He's doing a brilliant job. Do you not?
No, I don't. And
I'm joking.
I was a Labour Party supporter since the age of 10 years old. I can't stand Starmer.
Where did it all go wrong for you with Labour, Philippa?
Well, I don't even know what the Labour Party stands for anymore. They don't stand up for the working class person. They don't stand up for the elderly. They don't stand up for the disabled. They don't stand up for this country's heritage anymore. They don't stand up for anything I believe in anymore.
When did you fall out of love with Labour, Philippa? I'd be really interested to find out when you kind of fell out of love with Labour.
When Starmer came to power.
So even Corbyn was okay?
No, I loved Corbyn. I loved him as a man, and I loved his policies.
Interesting. So you've gone from... Are you a Reform UK supporter now, Philippa?
I am a member.
Wow, you've gone from supporting Jeremy Corbyn... Sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to the rally in Birmingham. I'm going to be sitting on the front row. I'm going to be listening to every word that Nigel says.
So you've gone from being a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn to being a supporter of Nigel Farage. That's quite a political journey.
It is. It is, because I am sick to death of the wokeism in this country.
Okay.
I am sick to death of UK nationals being homeless on the street, not being supported. I'm sick to death of us handing out our taxpayers' money to people coming in on boats, and it's mostly young men, and they end up carrying machetes and killing children in Southport.
Well, some of them...
Or their relatives.
Okay.
Or their relatives do. I think women are scared to go out at night. Women are scared of being attacked. Women are scared of airing their religious views if they're different from the people coming into this country.
Okay.
I just think our heritage is completely gone down the pan, and we should get that back.
Philippa, strong views there. Thank you very much indeed, Philippa in Dorset. Something people also have strong views on, not just in London, and we always got to be really careful at this station, and I hope we always are, to remember that 82% of our viewers and listeners live outside London. We're not the London-centric media, but we know that ULEZ, the ULEZ expansion in London, is something that a lot of other parts of the UK are looking at. We know there are low emission zones, for example, in Glasgow, Birmingham, Bristol. There are lots of different parts of the country. That's just a few examples, and we've got some of the results now of Sir Sadiq Khan, Knight of the Realm, Mayor of London, and his ULEZ expansion. Well, he says, and he argues anyway, that a lot of the air is cleaner, especially in the outer London boroughs, but let's have a look at the effects on the high street. One person who's been doing that is Susan Hall. She's a London Assembly member and a councillor in Harrow. Susan, what do you make of the effects of ULEZ?
Well, it was supposed to be groundbreaking, and let's face it, it's less than a 5% change overall. And by
it's early days, Susan.
But by his own statistics, the mayor, it shows that people's people were changing their habits in any event. Emissions were naturally going down. All this has done is caused people that have got the least amount of money, because they're the ones with the older cars, massive hardship. And I believe, I haven't read this report page to page because it's quite a big report and I need to really look at it. But if we look at some high streets, they're dying. And it's because lots of people, if I live in Harrow, on the outskirts of Harrow, people just won't come over the border if they've got a non-compliant car to go to the shops. So it's damaging in that respect.
It's interesting if you look at some of the numbers in here as well. Retail spending in London's 20 outer boroughs fell by 3.4% in the year after the charge was expanded, compared to a 2.8% fall across inner London. Barking and Dagenham, for example, saw high street spending plummeting by 13.25% after the charge was expanded to cover the borough. Now, Sir Sadiq himself, he has said air quality has improved, levels of harmful emissions declined. Today's report shows that ULEZ works driving down the levels of pollution, the Mayor of London says, taking old polluting cars off our roads and bringing cleaner air to millions more Londoners. With boroughs in outer London seeing some of the biggest reduction in harmful emissions and London's deprived communities also seeing greater benefits, this report shows why expanding ULEZ London-wide was so important. What do you think of that, Susan?
Well, I don't think much of Sadiq Khan, as you well know, and he will never say that it's had a bad effect on anything, because he never does. If anything ever goes wrong, it's somebody else's fault, and he won't look at this in the round. The thing is, people's cars would gradually have been replaced in any event, but he decided to bring this in, and this is nothing but a money-making exercise as far as I'm concerned. It's brought in millions and millions to TfL. And of course, it's the people that have got the least amount of money that are being charged. I think it's dreadful.
Given some of the statistics and evidence we know about the tube in London, and again, I don't want to be too London-centric, but there are very harmful emissions that are actually having an effect on people's lungs in some of those tube lines, and there's been various surveys and statistics around that. Should the Conservatives and other political parties be saying, hold on, Sadiq, if you really care, clean up the tube?
Although we have done. We've done that for years. And he ignores it. As I said to you before, he ignores anything if it's bad and just heralds anything that's good. But this actual report that we're referring to now is actually based on data from a fictional London without ULEZ. So it comes from a base that doesn't exist. We've seen his reports before, and you know, it's almost like...
Well, they haven't always been factual, let's face it. They haven't always had a factual basis.
No, they haven't.
Yeah.
They haven't, Peter.
Susan, I just want to ask you about another story. This is about Reform UK. We're talking about this today. There seems to be trouble in paradise. What do you make of this?
I wouldn't have said it was paradise, but it depends from your viewpoint. I was listening to what Philippa was saying, and like you, I was very surprised that she's gone from Corbyn to Reform. But actually, I've heard that quite a bit, and it does. Those of us that study, or not necessarily study, those of us that are absolutely watching the political climate.
Political nerds, Susan. Let's face it, political nerds.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we are, actually. But there you have it. It's quite interesting, isn't it? I mean, obviously, I'm more to the right of the Conservatives, so I agree with a lot that they say. I agree with some that they don't. And it's always going to be a power grab. I mean, politicians like to be the ones in charge, most of them. And if you lead any party, it's a difficult place to be.
Certainly.
It'll be very interesting to watch it going forward. I mean, Rupert Lowe's got an incredible following as well. So
he is a popular person and has a very strong constituency following. Anytime he's on, anytime I've interviewed him, we always have messages about how he's a good constituency MP according to his constituents. Susan, thank you. That's Susan Hall there, who is London Assembly member in Harrow. And thank you to Gary, who's been in touch and says, if Nigel Farage either left or was kicked out of Reform, who do you think would rejoice the loudest? Rupert Lowe and his merry band of followers, Keir Starmer, or whoever happens to be leader of the Conservatives when it happens? In war, you should never do what the opposition wants you to do, and I'm pretty sure that both Labour and the Conservatives would be equally delighted to see the back of Nigel Farage. Listen, Gary, I think that's right. And also, who are the really influential people in British politics over the last 10 years, okay, over the last 15 years. Nigel Farage has to be in the top 3. He probably is the number 1, actually. And in fact, he was, until recently, not even an MP. He was someone who wasn't elected for quite a while, especially after Brexit. And because obviously he was an MEP and then wasn't, because we were out of the European Parliament and out of Europe. So the point is that he is a very, very consequential person, and whether you hate him and hate his politics and think he's a dreadful human being, or whether you love him and think he is a messianic kind of figure, he's influential, he has a following, and sometimes in politics it's just about getting on with it. Or maybe actually it's better to, on the other side of it, speak your truth, as it were. Jackie in Oldham's got to speak her truth now. Jackie, thanks for the call. What would you like to say about this row?
I think Nigel's doing a very good job. I mean, if you look at where the party was and what has happened since he took over, it's been transformational. We're leading in the polls. We've got 400 branches. We're getting candidates to stand for all of the elections.
Including you, Jackie, if I remember from our previous conversation.
Yes, hopefully.
Will that be in the upcoming council elections? Are there elections in Oldham at that in May?
No, it will be in 2026.
Oh, okay. So you've got a bit of time to get the ground game together, get the strategists, get the posters. There's nothing. I've dealt with a lot of politicians in my time, and Jackie, apparently there's nothing weirder than just seeing a very, very large picture of yourself on a lamppost.
I know, I'm dreading it.
So what should Rupert Lowe do? Should he keep his trap shut?
I think he should, because if you're a member of a party, you've got to have discipline, you've got to be professional, and you've got to look at the greater good. You do not have a row in public that all it does is give a gift to your opponents. The media will jump on it and amplify it, and it will unsettle voters as well, and supporters. Rupert Lowe, I fully admire him. I think he's a great guy. He speaks a lot of common sense. However, Nigel has been there and bought the T-shirt. He is the leader of the party, and if Rupert has a problem with some of the ways that Nigel is leading this party, then he needs to do it in private. There's too much testosterone going on, and there's too many alpha males.
If only Reform UK could elect a few women, Jackie. I can't think of anyone. Can you think of anyone who'd be a good person, who'd be a good woman to be elected for Reform UK?
Oh, of course. Peter.
Jackie, thanks for your thoughts there. That's Jackie in Oldham there. I'm not endorsing any candidate, but Jackie often speaks a lot of common sense. And all I would say, as an impartial observer, Jackie will be a very strong candidate. Now, there's some breaking news here on Talk, and that is that a 32-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of the murder of 16-year-old Nathaniel Burrell in Stockwell on Tuesday. That was the young man, the 16-year-old, who was shot and killed in Stockwell in South London. That is the Metropolitan Police saying that a 32-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of the murder of that 16-year-old man, Nathaniel Burrell. If there are any updates on that, I suspect there won't be during this programme, but because these things take a while, there are obviously questions and legal process to follow, but of course we will keep you up to date on that. Horrendous shooting there, of course. Very sad that that 16-year-old man, young boy really, lost his life there, and a 32-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of the murder. On suspicion of murder, it should be said. Sarah in London says Reform can only win an election by taking votes from Labour as well as the Tories. He's not going to do that by going hardcore to the right. He needs to cast the net wide. Once he's in, he can implement hardcore policies. After all, Starmer has shown us that manifestos are not worth the paper they are written on. Edward says, Peter, people should keep an eye on the prize. Reform are the only party that can arrest the massive decline in this country, regardless of who the leader is. Although Nigel is the best leader by far, in my opinion, Rupert does not get it and therefore should return to his former party. Bill in Southampton says, I think the guy giving Nigel a gnashing is suffering from a bad case of sour grapes. Without Nigel, there is no Reform UK. I believe in him. It's early days, but the fact people are having a go at him shows he's doing what he said he'll do. He's ruffling feathers. Long may he reign. final one before the break. Kenny in Edinburgh says, "Hi Cardi P, you've got to laugh at Ed Miliband's brass neck and telling everyone to drive electric cars and eat less meat while he's driven around in a non-electric ministerial car and whose way of eating a bacon roll borders on being a criminal offence." That was a long time ago. Can we not let it go for Ed Miliband? I suggest we don't, actually. Miliband just seems he can be making the most of his 15 minutes while he can. Well, he's being slammed, certainly, Kenny, by Rachel Reeves and Jonathan Reynolds, certainly in Cabinet. They don't agree with his net zero plans. And yeah, maybe he'll... He does... In fairness to Ed Miliband, he does make a bit of a joke about the bacon roll eating, which is never glamorous. My boss, Danny Morris, who is the Ayatollah of audio, was the person who caught me eating a breakfast roll the other day. And he just sort of looked at me in a kind of, "That's a very messy roll you're eating there." It was very delicious as well, and there was bacon in it. Anyway, there's lots more to discuss. After the break, we'll take more of your calls. If you want to get your voice on the air, 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
Robert Jenrick was in the Home Office when this was going through the Home Office with internal consultation. Let's be absolutely clear. Yeah. We don't want any form of two-tier justice. That's why Shabana Mahmood's been absolutely clear on this, that she's written to the Sentencing Council asking them to review their position. If they don't review their position, we'll be taking action legislatively using the powers that Parliament has, because it's right that the Sentencing Council is independent, but it's also right that decisions on minimum sentences are informed by what Parliament wants.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Chris is touring the Scottish Highlands. Hopefully you've got Talk on your car radio. That obnoxious Sadiq Khan could have the same effect, Chris says, but with much less cost by depositing some very large concrete blocks on all the main roads leading into London. Well, let's hope he doesn't do that. David in the Cotswolds says, given the reduction in sentences for the Just Stop Oil vandals, the new sentencing guidelines supporting lenient sentences for minority ethnic, minority religious and minority sexual groups, the guidelines must also include those people called Lucia and Cressida, or people with minority green views. Another stab in the back for white working class not well off males, says David in the Cotswolds. Maybe some of the views expressed in this station are minority views. I wonder if those should be protected. Yes, justice certainly for Lucia and Cressida, and Lucia Whittaker de Abreu is the one I worry about. There was actually another one of poshly named Just Stop Oil people called Alex de Koenig, which literally means Alex the King. He was not a king, and in fact he was a pauper, very much so in his views, and indeed how he treated my producer, because he told him to quote unquote go F yourself. Well, he didn't say go F yourself, he said something else, but I'm not going to say at 10 minutes to 3 what the exact word was, but you can use your imagination, and I then banned him from any of my shows. So Alex de Koenig will never be on my programmes again. In fairness, he did apologise when I called him out on it on air, and indeed through a WhatsApp exchange. Right then, let's speak to Wasim, who is in Manchester. What would you like to say, Wasim? You're very welcome to the programme.
Good afternoon, Peter. How are you doing?
Okay, thanks. Yeah. What do you think of this Reform UK row?
I'm all up for voting for Reform, Peter, because I'm sick and tired of the overpopulated roads, the housing crisis, the cost of living. But what I want to ask you is Nigel Farage the man to deliver these promises to us? Because he promised us after voting out of Brexit that we'll be in a much better situation. When you look at the numbers, we're in a dire situation compared to where we was.
I mean, his argument is actually vote me in and I'll sort it all out.
I mean, I love some of his policies. Majority of his policies I'm all for. But is he the man to deliver it? Because he promised us if we vote out of Europe and Brexit, we'll be in a much better situation. And the numbers don't lie, Peter. You know, at that time, there was probably 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 coming in. It went up threefold to 1.2, 1.3 million. The housing crisis went up. The cost of living went up fivefold. Is he the man to deliver the
Well, what do you think? I mean, you want to vote for Reform UK, but would you trust another leader, or do you think Reform UK is all about Nigel Farage?
I mean, Nigel Farage is obviously the head of... he is like the main man in there, but my question is, when these people get put into power, is he really going to be allowed to go against the elite people that run the world and they give orders out? Is he the man to put his life on the line and say no?
It'll be interesting to find out. They're certainly riding high in the polls at the moment, Wasim. Thanks for your thoughts on that. Who would be a good woman to join Reform? How about Ciala Braverman, says this person. I think Mike is the person who sent that in. Angie in Portsmouth said, I'm a Reform supporter, but I believe with or without Farage, the numbers still would have gone up. They grew their base from the results of the election. If Farage left, I personally don't think it would have much effect. If Ben Habib came back, the numbers would rise further, says Angie in Portsmouth. Angie, I'm not sure you're right about that, but please tell me if I'm wrong. That's okay. On this programme and all my programmes, we disagree without being disagreeable. There's some breaking news now on Talk, and that is that three Bulgarians, Vanya Gabarova, who's 30, Teomir Ivanchek, who's 39, and Katrin Ivanova, who's 33, have been found guilty at the Old Bailey on their part in one of the largest and most complex Russian spy operations to be uncovered on UK soil. If you're watching on the screen, we can see pictures of the three of them now. They are guilty within that spy ring. They've been convicted on Russian spy operations, and we will bring you more on that between now and 4 o'clock. That is one of the largest and most complex Russian spy operations to be uncovered on UK soil. We'll bring you more on that in the next hour. But first, let's speak to Andrew in Hertfordshire. Andrew, good to talk to you. What would you like to say?
Thanks ever so much. Cracking show this afternoon. I think you've really focused on the most important point here.
Thank you.
Justice has to be blind. And what we've actually sitting atop here is, if you come to Britain and you're British, adopt the culture. Now, you can go down a load of rabbit holes with that, but the reality is, at the point of sentencing, justice is blind. And we voted for politicians, rightly or wrongly. We didn't vote for judges who have taken a position now where they sit atop and are making massive structural changes with powers that were never designed that way. And you've come from a strong background, across the sea, and you've seen when communities are treated differently and how wretched that can be. Mm-hmm. This is actually the breakdown of civic society. If I was a Scientologist and I was, say, attacking young girls, there would be more victims because I'd be treated leniently before I was put away. So the people that are going to suffer are the victims here, but the greater suffering is society.
Well, there's a very interesting point. There's a very interesting point I actually just want to make to you in regard to what David Lammy said in this report that he put forward. Let me see if I can find this. And there was a really good report, a really good comment made on it earlier. David Lammy said, let me see if I can just find this. He says, it's vital to do what they want to do with the sentencing thing, because considering the gap between the difference in backgrounds, both in social class and ethnicity, between the magistrates, judges, and many of those offenders who come before them. Well, I mean, magistrates, as the person said earlier on in text, Andrew, said, well, magistrates might not have been paedophile before, they might not have been an armed robber before, they might not have been a murderer before, but they can say, you're a murderer and here is the law and this is how it should be implemented. And that should be nothing to do with factors people can't control, like their ethnicity or sexuality.
100%. I mean, you know, Lammy, he really genuinely, one of your callers once said he was as thick as mince. That at the point of sentencing, the clerk of the court gives all the information. It's laid out in front of the judge or the magistrate, and then blind, they may...
And it should be straightforward. Andrew, we're going to crash the news, but listen, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts there. That's Andrew in Hertfordshire. Let me know your thoughts. 0344 499 1000. The next hour will bring you more on that Russian spy ring. We'll talk more about the problems in reform as well and get your thoughts as well. Stay with us here on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, this is Talk. It's just gone 3 o'clock. There is some major breaking news here in the UK, and that is that 3 Bulgarian nationals have been found guilty of spying for Russia here in the UK. They had targets including investigative journalists whose work was exposing Russia's role in nerve agent attacks against Alexei Navalny, for example, in 2020, and here in the UK in Salisbury against Sergei Skripal in 2018. This is a major story. We're going to bring you lots more on it between now and 4 o'clock, starting with Bill Browder in a second, who is Putin's #1 foreign enemy and head of the global Magnitsky Justice campaign. Let's go straight to him now, actually. Bill, we're going to talk to you about Trump and Zelensky and many other aspects, but we now know that these 3 Bulgarians, in addition to 2 other Bulgarians and a 6th defendant as well, admitted spying before the trial. We've got these 6 convictions now in the public domain. The cell undertaking elaborate surveillance on people in places targeted by Russia, including investigative journalists, and at a US military base in Germany. Members crisscrossing Europe from their base in the UK. This is a very, very serious, elaborate plot, spy ring. Tell us your reaction to these verdicts.
Well, I mean, this is this story is really, I mean, it's the kind of stuff that you can make movies out of. It's not just these guys, but if you remember, there was this big story about Wirecard. Wirecard was a huge German fraud. It was like a Ponzi scheme, looking like a fintech company. The guy in charge of it was this German wunderkind until he fled. When the police went after him, he fled to Russia, and then he's been sitting in Russia, according to all these documents, organizing these Bulgarians to try to kill the guy in charge of Bellingcat, the organization which was uncovering all of Putin's poisoning schemes, including Salisbury and, as you mentioned, Alexei Navalny and so on and so forth. And what's interesting about this is that if you've been following the trial as I had, these guys were not using tradecraft. They were using WhatsApp, and I think there was something like 80,000 messages where he was instructing them what to do, who to follow, what to all this kind of stuff, with a plot to assassinate Christo Grozov, the guy in charge of Bellingcat.
I mean, if you're using WhatsApp, isn't that a bit amateurish?
Completely amateurish, and this is one of the things that people should understand about all of these Russian gangsters and Putin gangsters, I should say, is that we build them up to be some type of evil geniuses, but they're really like B students from C universities with no training. It's amateur hour, and in my own experience with the Russians, they're always messing stuff up. They're always information is flowing and leaking and so on and so forth. Now, what's interesting is that the Russians didn't even use Russians. They used Bulgarians in this case.
Why do you think that was, Bill?
Well, part of the reason is that we kicked out a lot of Russian spies.
Mm-hmm.
After Salisbury, we cleaned out all the Russian spies out of the embassy. And in fact, the person who exposed all those spies was this guy, Christo Grozov, who was the target of this particular attack. And so, I mean, it is interesting that the Russians are calling on people of other nationalities like these Bulgarians. I don't think these Bulgarians were highly trained spies. I think they were kind of amateurs themselves. I think they were doing it for money. And that's the kind of spying we're seeing more often.
Let me just get this straight, Bill. So if we kicked out a load of Russian spies, as you correctly say, the Russians then paying people who have a price, as everybody does, who are Bulgarians, who are not professional spies, essentially, who are using WhatsApp, which everybody knows it's not as secure as it could be. Although they would say it's encrypted end to end. But let's face it, if you're going to be a spy, you're probably not going to use an app like WhatsApp. Does this show how desperate the Russians are in all of this? That this was such an amateurish operation that could be exposed, and now these people are presumably going to have very severe sentences, and they're expendable, presumably, from the Russians who put them up to it?
Well, it shows a lot of things. First of all, it does show that they're desperate. The other thing it shows, which I think is really important, is that they don't really care. I mean, it's... they're now more and more brazen. I think that the big takeaway is how brazen the Russians are in all this kind of stuff. And as you mentioned, these people are expendable. They're not some kind of like guys that have worked for Putin for 30 years and he's got a loyalty to them. He can hang them out to dry. He may not hang them out to dry. He may eventually try to swap out these people for some British person that gets kidnapped in Russia to get them out of jail. He does that as well. And I mean, it's hard to say what their fate is in the future, but these are not high-level people, easy to hire. I don't think they even got a lot of money out of this whole arrangement. And for every 3 or 5 Bulgarians that were hired, there's probably hundreds of other people of all nationalities that the Russians could recruit to do similar types of operations.
Thank you, Bill. I mean, it's great. It was a very happy coincidence that you were there with us to actually discuss Donald Trump and Vladimir Zelensky. And of course, you know this backwards, as does the security journalist Duncan Gardam, who's going to join us in about 10 minutes' time and give us more detail. He's been following the trial in court as well. Bill, stay with us, because I want to talk about Donald Trump being apparently very encouraged by Zelensky's commitment to the peace process. We have a social media post by him saying by the president, saying, based on the fact that Russia is absolutely pounding Ukraine on the battlefield right now, I'm strongly considering large-scale banking sanctions and tariffs on Russia until a ceasefire and final settlement agreement on peace is reached. To Russia and Ukraine, get to the table right now before it is too late. Thank you, 3 exclamation marks. Diplomacy by social media messages. Donald Trump's done it before. It has proved successful before. We've seen this in the context, of course, of Sergei Lavrov yesterday, the foreign minister of Russia, saying that if there are any troops, even peacekeeping troops in Ukraine, that will be seen as an attack by NATO. I just wonder where you think this is now, where things are, especially when we're moving in a direction of talks, which may well happen next week.
Well, I have to say I'm pretty demoralized by where we are right now. So up until this minute, the only person who has been bearing the brunt of Donald Trump has been the Ukrainian people and Vladimir Zelensky. Since this whole, sort of peace effort, I put peace in quotation marks, effort has started, Donald Trump has cut off military aid for Ukraine. He's cut off intelligence sharing for Ukraine, which means that they can't see in advance when bombs are being launched at them. He's cut off access to data on satellite data for the Ukrainians to use. It's really a pretty tragic situation. They've now threatened to deport all the Ukrainian refugees that are in the United States. And so I would say that, and then of course there was that horrible, humiliating, unbelievable Oval Office meeting where Trump and J.D. Vance shouted at and humiliated.
Hard to believe it was only a week ago.
Yeah, and so I'm pretty demoralized, to be honest. And this latest statement, I mean, and by the way, I know that it's not just me who's demoralized. The American people are demoralized. 94% of Americans think Putin is a bad guy. Republican lawmakers are demoralized. I know many of them because I've worked with them on lots of sanctions legislation around Russia. Everyone's demoralized, and perhaps Trump has realized that this was a threshold issue, that if he continued on the path that he was on, he was going to actually lose the confidence of everybody over this issue. And so I don't know what it means by this latest tweet that he's put out. I don't know. We haven't seen any actions. We've seen with the Ukrainians, there were actions, really material actions that led to deaths of Ukrainians, cutting off military aid, cutting off intelligence. That's real. That's real. Yeah. So far, what we've seen is a tweet. If he actually does something, let's say that he decides to confiscate Russia's central bank reserves, or if he decides to embargo all Russian oil, or something like that, then that would show that he's actually being trying to be a mediator here. At the moment, he looks like he has sided with Putin against Zelensky, so siding with the villain against the victim. I would be really happy to see that change, and hopefully this latest tweet is some indication that it will. But until he does something, I'm not holding my breath.
Bill, thank you. That is Bill Browder there. He is joining us today. Of course, Bill Browder is Putin's #1 foreign enemy and head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. Thank you to everybody who's been in touch and reacting already to this story, that not just that Bill was talking about there in terms of Trump being very encouraged by Zelensky's commitment to the peace process, and that message that we read out from Donald Trump that came in the last 45 minutes or so, talking about what he might do to Russia, as Bill says. Let's wait and see. But also the major breaking news story here in the United Kingdom, and that is that 3 Bulgarian nationals have been found guilty of spying for Russia in the UK. They're called Katrin Ivanova, who's 33, Vanya Gabrova, who's 30, and Tiomir Ivanchevich, who is 39, all from London, part of a group of Bulgarians who spied on this country between 2020 and 2023. Now, they join fellow Bulgarians Orlan Rusev, who's 47, from Great Yarmouth, and Bisser Damazapov, who's 43, from London, who had previously admitted conspiracy to spy. A 6th defendant, Ivan Stoyevov, who's 34, also admitted spying before the trial. His conviction can actually now be reported for the first time. So we've got the spy ring of 6 people, Bulgarians all, who have been spying on this country, targeting investigative journalists, including those who expose Russia's role in nerve agent attacks against the opposition leader Alexei Navalny and Sergei Skripal. Remember, in Salisbury in 2018, that horrendous nerve agent attack that happened in a very, very ordinary town. Well, actually, that is what they were targeting, those people who were investigative journalists. Let's speak, we'll talk in a moment to Duncan Gardam. He is a security journalist. He's been following the trial in great depth. Big implications for the United Kingdom. We'll come back to that in just a second. But there are lots of people who want to talk as well about Reform UK. Anne in London, who says, Peter, I vote on party, not personalities, and respect for Raj. I don't like the emphasis on names. I'll vote Reform as long as they stay true, whoever the leader is, says Anne in London. And Gary says, I'm tired of people like your earlier caller who want to blame the state the country is in on Brexit. In case he hasn't noticed, the entire European Union is in meltdown right now. The German economy is on its knees, and throughout Europe, voters are complaining about the cost of living and mass immigration, and they're taking it out on their politicians by kicking them out of office. We are not in the mess because of Brexit. We're in the mess despite Brexit. Despite Brexit. It's a while since I've heard that, and in a very different context. Sticking with Reform just for a moment before we go back to the story about the Bulgarian spy ring. Let's speak to Kate in Kent. She's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Kate, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Oh, afternoon, Peter. I'd like to say that I admire both Rupert and Nigel. I am a Reform voter.
Okay.
However, Rupert is very good at collecting data. He's got his facts and his figures. That's lovely, and we need that. However, I do believe that Nigel is the politician. He's the leader.
Maybe if they could work together. They've got different skill sets, Kate. Surely if they work together, Reform UK could have even greater success than it already has, perhaps.
Oh, yes. I mean, I just don't know where this... I mean, obviously, you've got to have differences of opinions within your party, everybody. But because it's come out, you know, he's actually, Rupert's actually said it not behind closed doors.
Yeah, publicly, yeah.
Which I truly think maybe that was the wrong thing to do because, you know, you're going to have differences of opinions. It's natural.
Yeah.
But I do believe he should have spoken to Nigel first. They should have, like...
Maybe he did. Maybe he wasn't listened to. We'll not know those discussions anyway. Kate, thank you for your thoughts. Really appreciate that. That's Kate in Kent. And if you want to add your voice to the discussion today, is Nigel Farage running Reform UK well? Or you want to talk about the Bulgarian spy ring that has been targeting investigative journalists? Those people have just been found guilty. The sentencing will no doubt come in a week or two's time. We'll talk more about that with Duncan Gardam. He's a security journalist. He's been following the story, and we'll talk to him in just a few minutes here on Talk. Get all the latest information and stuff that we couldn't know before because it was before the court, and now there'll be a lot more information coming out about these 6 people part of this spy ring. Stay with us here on Talk.
bless him. Nigel has been in this game for decades. He has devoted the best part of his life to the causes that he pursues. He has taken reform to its highest ever position, where it is in real prospect of being part or even running the next government. So I think Rupert just maybe needs to take a little step back.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, in travel news today, you may know that Eurostar services to and from Paris, they've been cancelled for all of today. That was after an unexploded World War II bomb was found near Paris's main station, the Gare du Nord. Well, we've got a picture of that bomb. It looks very much like an old bomb, it must be said. If you're watching on the screen, you can see it now. If not, I will describe it to you. I mean, it sort of looks like a large rock, really, but an unexploded World War II bomb is not what you want to be near your train, and that is why bomb disposal experts are working to make it safe after it was reportedly found in the middle of the tracks in the area of Saint-Denis during overnight works. Apparently, it's not that unusual to discover unexploded wartime bombs, but obviously you don't want that anywhere near your train, and that's why Eurostar services to and from Paris have been cancelled for the rest of the day. We've also got some breaking news, that is that the Independent Office for Police Conduct has reopened its investigation into previous assaults by the Nottingham killer Valdo Calocane, following representations from the victims' families. That's according to the Independent Office for Police Conduct. They have reopened their investigation into previous assaults by Valdo Calocane, a very controversial case, heartbreaking in some of the detail, and of course the questions about whether the right thing was done in that case. Those questions will now continue to be asked because that has been reopened by the Independent Office for Police Conduct. Of course, if there's any development on that, we will bring it to you throughout the afternoon here on Talk. Now then, let's talk about another breaking story, broke about half an hour ago. That is that the 6 Bulgarians, 3 of them convicted today, been found guilty of spying for Russia in the UK. They're all part of a Bulgarian group who spied between 2020 and 2023. The cell undertook elaborate surveillance on people and places targeted by Russia, including investigative journalists and a US military base in Germany, with members crisscrossing Europe from their base in the UK. Duncan Gardam is a security analyst, international terrorism expert, and the absolute doyen of security reporting in this country, and I'm delighted he joins me now because there's literally no better person to tell us what is happening here. Duncan, I know you were following this very closely. Just bring us through this very elaborate and worrying case, especially as there seemed to be big things that they were able to do, but of course they were found out because of even using things like WhatsApp, which usually spies these days don't do.
Yeah, absolutely. They were mainly using an encrypted app called Telegram, actually, which is supposed to be a little bit more secure than WhatsApp. But you're absolutely right. They weren't deleting any of these messages, and they were all found when police crashed through the doors of a guest house, 33-room guest house in Great Yarmouth. And that's where a guy called Orlin Rusev, a Bulgarian gentleman, had been running the spy operation. And it was absolutely stacked to the ceiling with all kinds of surveillance equipment, including a device called an IMSI grabber, which pulls mobile phone identifiers out of the air, and they plan to use that to try and get hold of Ukrainian servicemen's mobile details, and that would have allowed them, once the Ukrainians returned from the base in Germany to the front line in Ukraine, to actually target the air defense batteries that they were operating. And that really is the height and the most serious thing that they were doing, apart from all this following around of dissidents across Europe.
Tell us about following around those dissidents and investigative journalists as well. Tell us about the journalist Christo Grozev as well, and what they were doing there and what they hope to achieve there.
Yeah, well, Christo Grozev is important, really, because he's the man that revealed the true identities of the GRU, the Russian military intelligence agents who tried to poison Sergei Skripal, the MI6 double agent in Salisbury. And Christo Grozev had really been a thorn in the side, and still is, really, because he's still at it, in terms of investigating what the GRU and other elements of Russian intelligence have been up to around Europe. And that also included the poisoning of Alexei Navalny. And some people will remember that there was quite a notorious video in which Navalny, before his death in custody, fronted up to some of these agents with Grozev alongside him, and they admitted to poisoning him with Novichok in his underpants. So that is one of the reasons why the Russian regime really wanted to keep a close eye on Grozev, and perhaps even to kidnap him and take him to Russia.
Duncan, tell us a little bit about what we know about these Bulgarians, the fact that they have been used. We were speaking to Bill Browder about 15 minutes ago, and he was saying that actually it shows perhaps the desperation of the Russians, given that so many Russian spies have been expelled from this country, although I'm sure they're all completely legitimate diplomats and they shouldn't have been expelled in the first place. Ha-ha. I just wonder why this group was used and what this tells us about Russia's involvement and what they're planning to do and what they have been doing and are presumably still doing in this country.
Well, that's a very good point, Peter, because what the government have tried to do in recent years is to expel as many of the suspected spies from the Russian embassy as possible. And then the Russians have, of course, then tried to apply for visas to send people back in who would be spies as well, but not ones that were recognized. And they've fended off a lot of those. And so the theory, according to the people I've been talking to, is that the Russians have increasingly relied on what they're calling outsourcing. So using non-professional spies to go out and do their dirty work for them. And that really is the story here, because these Bulgarians are have normal jobs. One was a medical courier. One of the female spies ran a beauty parlour in Acton in West London, and another one was a kind of amateur cage fighter. So they have all these kind of varying backgrounds, but their main job really was one of surveillance, to go around and keep an eye on people and then potentially to kidnap them.
Duncan, thank you for bringing us up to date on that. Many years ago, Duncan, I was on work experience at the Daily Telegraph, and you were very kind to me, and it's great to talk to you on the air, and when I grow up I want to be a journalist as good as you. So thank you for that, and have a really good day. I really appreciate it. Duncan Gardam there, who is a security analyst and international terrorism expert. Lots to discuss in all of this. We'll continue talking about the Reform UK row as well, Trump, Zelensky and all the rest of it. We'll also ask the question whether under 16s should be banned from social media. There's a report out today about that. Lucy Beresford is a psychotherapist and author. She's going to be talking to us about that in just a second here on Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, we're reacting this afternoon to that major breaking news story, that is that 3 Bulgarian nationals have been found guilty of spying for Russia in the UK. They're part of a 6-person spy ring, amateur spies essentially, used by Russia, as we were talking with Duncan Gardam and Bill Browder as well in the last half an hour or so. They've told us a lot more information about it, and the fact that a lot of these Bulgarians were brought in essentially because so many Russian spies had been ejected from the country, had been deported because they were spies, and that is what we had done, and how desperate essentially the Russians have got. They raided the various premises and the flat that they were in, the guest house, and they were brought to justice. Katrin Ivanova, 33, Vanya Gabarova, 30, and Timur Ivanchuk, all from London, were part of that group. They spied between 2020 and 2023, and we know that their targets were people like Christo Gruzev, who is an investigative journalist whose work exposes Russia's role in the nerve agent attacks, things like the attacks on the opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who was assassinated, of course, in 2020, and later than that, but the attack was in 2020, and Sergei Skripal in Salisbury. We remember that ludicrous press conference where those guys said they wanted to go to Salisbury because of his 123-metre high spire. Well, actually, there was a lot of investigative work done by excellent journalists such as Christo Gruzev that was targeted by this Bulgarian group. It undertook elaborate surveillance on people and places targeted by Russia, a US military base in Germany, members crisscrossing Europe using different messaging apps, and thousands of messages exchanged between the cell's leaders were actually recovered by the police. There were plots to kidnap, there were plots to kill some of the group's targets, as well as ensnaring them in honey traps, for example. There are 3 other Bulgarians previously admitted, well, 2 of them admitted conspiracy to spy, and another admitted spying before the trial, and the convictions of the 6th man, well, that can now be reported, but the other 2 we know about. So 6 Bulgarians who are going to prison, I would imagine, for a very, very long time as part of that spy ring, and there's a lot more to come on that. I'm sure Kevin O'Sullivan will be covering that between 4 o'clock and 7 o'clock. He's doing Drive today. I was doing Ian's, I'm doing Ian's show, indeed. I'm still here for another 28 minutes. And then tomorrow, no doubt, we'll talk more about it on my show between 10 and 12:30. My Saturday show, I'm here between 10 and 12:30. And then on Sunday as well, between 10 and 1. Lots to discuss. And Peter has been in touch. Another Peter says, uncovering this Bulgarian spy ring is exactly what MI5 should be used for, not political interference and not targeting political opponents. When this country uses its intelligence services for legitimate reasons, i.e. for defence of the realm, then it always excels, but we must stick to legitimate cases. And Kev says, as for these Bulgarian spies, I'm sure there'll be plenty of lefty lawyers lining up to represent them to ensure they aren't removed from the country due to their lives being in danger if they return home, says Kev in Ripley in Derbyshire. Alan is in Shropshire and wants to respond to another story that we're discussing today. In fact, it's been the main discussion point today. We've been asking the question, is Nigel Farage running Reform UK well? Alan, there's been quite a big row about this. We've heard from Rupert Lowe, we've heard from Nigel Farage, we've heard as well from Job West, who's a former chairman of a local association of Reform UK. Where do your sympathies lie here? What do you think has happened, and who should we believe and have sympathy with, Alan, do you think?
Good afternoon, Peter.
Hello there.
I think everybody's got to admire Nigel Farage, because let's face it, he's a simple chap. He started off with nothing. He's got to where he is. He's got a tremendous party now. And the thing is about Nigel, he always says exactly what he thinks.
He didn't quite start off with nothing. He came from quite a wealthy family and went to a very prestigious school. But I know what you mean. Politically, he started with nothing, and he's built up to where he is now.
Yeah, well, that's it, Pete. But the thing is, I mean, he sticks to his guns. He's been in the European Parliament. He's been ridiculed there. But fair dues, he always sticks to his guns. He tells them exactly what he thinks. And the thing is, Nigel actually says what the British people think. I mean, he talks a tremendous amount of common sense. And the thing is, with these political parties, as soon as they get nearly into power, they all start arguing, because there's always somebody who thinks they can do it slightly better than the person who's actually leading the party. And the thing is, if Nigel were to leave the party now, Reform would just disappear.
Doesn't this show, Alan, that there's just a lack of discipline in Reform UK? Because part of every party is a coalition. There are always disagreements, there are always personalities, but part of managing a party is keeping some of that under wraps and saying, have your disagreements in private, but in public, don't slag off the leader, especially if you're an MP.
Yeah, I agree. I mean that's politics. But the thing is, I mean, it's all down to personalities. I mean, there's people out there you just can't tell them. I mean, you take Rachel Reeves, you take Sama. You can't tell them a confounded thing. You know, they always seem to know they're best.
But can you? Well, maybe that's a strength of their dealing with politics, in that they are disciplined and they say roughly the same thing. We haven't had that many leaks and briefings from Labour in the last few months. But I wonder, in Reform UK, I mean, in the early stages, if there are rows that are public, does that actually show that whilst he is undoubtedly a charismatic and popular politician, maybe Nigel Reform can't manage other people?
Oh, I think I suppose if they do kind of argue on the television, yeah, but as you said before, they shouldn't actually argue in front of people, especially in front of the tabloids and everything else. If they're going to argue or have discussions, keep them in the back room. But okay. They have got to appear united. I mean, if they start to turn into the same as the Conservatives and the Labour, have arguments and etc., then I mean they aren't going to get anywhere. But you know, it's just important that they kind of keep themselves together and keep Nigel in charge, to be honest.
Alan, thank you. That's Alan in Shropshire there. Cecilia has been in touch and says, I suggest Nigel realises that Donald Trump is a fair weather friend. The end doesn't always justify the means. If Reform want the ordinary silent majority with a British sense of fair play to vote for them, who don't support Tommy Robinson, Rupert who? Interesting one there, says Cecilia. Thank you for that. Sir Chris Whitty is England's chief medical officer. Remember him from the bad old days of COVID. He's the top health official still. And he's going to investigate whether under 16s should be banned from using social media apps such as Facebook and Instagram. Ministers will then decide whether to raise the digital age of consent, which allows 13-year-olds to sign up for social media platforms, see if that should be raised. I mean, in my experience, it must be said, on knowledge of these things, it doesn't really add up to much that there is a 13-year-old thing. A lot of younger people will try to sign up for these apps, and even when they're on them, their age, it means they can actually be a target. Let's discuss all this with Lucy Beresford, who's a psychotherapist and author. Lucy, what do you think of this idea anyway? Because there have been quite a number of ideas, including from former teachers, from various MPs, seeking support for plans to ban under 16s from using social media and ban them from using smartphones in schools.
Yeah, so I'm in favour of that kind of ban, and I don't normally find myself being the person that wants to ban things. I want the world to be a big exploratory place where you can learn about the world and kind of have your life stimulated by all sorts of opportunities. But the problem is that screen time and phone usage in general really does compromise the ability for young people. And we are here talking about people whose brains are still developing. So that's kind of prepubescent and adolescence, from really having meaningful growth in their brain. What it's doing is it's sidetracking them, and it's creating these neural pathways because their behavior is happening on a daily, sometimes on an hourly basis. And you're encouraging young people to formulate behaviours which will become very addictive in the future. So what we've seen is places like Australia who want to see smartphones banned in schools. We've seen countries like Norway who want to raise the age limit from 13, as you said, to 16. And I don't see why we shouldn't explore that too, because the downside is that we're creating a whole generation who are incredibly skilled at social media and tech in general, but their social skills and their emotional development are being retarded. It's
interesting, though, a lot of teenagers, I don't disagree with a single word you've said there, by the way, Lucy, but there are a lot of teenagers whose life is done online. You know, they are people, they may not be in social media apps, they probably are, but for example, you know, parties and social events and football clubs and, you know, dance classes and various parental groups and kids, groups and so on, they are done on things like WhatsApp. They are done online. We have so many schools now that have, you know, every child has an iPad. And I mean, my nephew, for example, is 12. He has an iPad. He brings it to school and he does work on his iPad there. They're in front of screens anyway. Obviously, the content is very different. But do we need to say, actually, this isn't just about an age of consent. This is actually about society saying the internet's a good thing. It's also a bad thing. Maybe the way their lives are organised needs to be slightly different. The systems and the protocols that are put in place need to be done in a different way. I mean, I can't see people ringing landlines. I'm not saying people should go back to the 1990s or whatever. But the fact is that a lot of life, if you're 12, 13, 14 years old, is done online anyway.
Yes, but it doesn't have to be that way. That's the point. That's what we've fallen into. And you're absolutely right. If you know, I've got 2.5-year-olds in my life who know how to access a film and start a film online just because they've been watching what the grown-ups do. And children are like sponges. They absorb all this information, and therefore if they see the grown-ups on social media all the time, if they see them on their smartphones, as you say, because the local PTA association is issuing its information via WhatsApp or Telegram, but not through paper or email, then that's the world that the children are growing up into. But my point is, it doesn't have to be that way, and we've got to protect childhood for as long as possible, because two things really. Nowadays, if you're under the age of 15, you are probably going to live to over 110 with medical advancement. Do we really want to say that we want to shorten childhood even more when in fact the rest of your life is going to be so much longer? And similarly, yes, we've been using mobile phones and tech and social media, but in the great scheme of things, we've only really been doing that for the last, let's say, 5, 10, 15 years. And human beings have been on this planet for, let's say, 40,000 years or 4 million years, however you want to, characterize a human being. So it's a really tiny window of time in which we've been actually modifying human behavior by giving people these screens. And if we make a ruling, if we make it easier for parents to say, nobody under the age of 16 can have a smartphone. Nobody there under the age of 16 needs to be on social media. It's going to make it easier for parents to set those boundaries, because at the moment, without any ruling, you get that awful pester power from children.
And you get a very weird
worst phrase, which is that, but you're the strictest parents in the village, and I'm the only person that's not allowed to have a phone. Whereas if nobody in the school had a phone, if nobody in the village if no child had a phone in the village, then there wouldn't be that sense of missing out.
And also it gives them a great excuse to say, well, it's against the law, quite literally.
Yes, but again, as a grown-up, you're then going to have to monitor your own behaviour, because the part of the problem is that grown-ups too are spending too much time on their screens. And it's changing the way that we interact with people, and it's changing our emotional range.
Have you seen that in your clinical work as a psychotherapist, that there are people addicted to screens, addicted to not having conversations perhaps, and actually just messaging people on an app?
People never going on dates, people breaking up and never wanting a relationship again because they can have a relationship with their smartphone and their Alexa. People who are in relationships and don't know how to have proper conversations, they don't know how to repair relationships, they don't know how to grow and build and deepen relationships, because they're so used to having an interaction with an inanimate object. It's something that you can control, you can be as horrible to it as you want, and it will never desert you, it will never challenge you, it will never fight back, it will never try to get you to be a bigger person. It's a very one-dimensional relationship, and we're really in danger. We saw this in the pandemic. I cannot believe that we haven't learned the lessons from 4 years ago, which is that if you don't have interaction with other human beings, not only do you lose those social skills, but your mental health declines.
Although the person who's investigating all this is Sir Chris Whitty, who of course helped impose the lockdown.
People should know. He should remember what everybody went through, partly because of some of the things that they advised the government to do. This idea that you do not have interactions with other people, but you supply. Yes, exactly. One would hope not. No, but it was a typical child movie, which of course I can't even remember the name of. I think it was called Inside Out, Inside Me Too, which is kind of for slightly older children. But the scary thing was that this film just got started without any grown-ups in the room.
I used to be obsessed with Frozen, but I somehow managed to let it go. Lucy, thanks very much. That's Lucy.
You should
Barrett.
sing that line. You should sing that.
Well, it's interesting, Lucy, actually, because I had a friend who went to see Frozen with me and then referred to me for some time afterwards as Olaf. And I did ask him, what is it about the bouncy, chatty, slightly naive and largely thin-skinned character that you think resembles me? Right then, we're going to talk more about reform. We're going to talk more about the social media ban. We're going to talk more perhaps about Chris Whitty, if you want to do that. We'll take a load of calls right up to the hour, right up to 4 o'clock, when Kevin O'Sullivan will be here with Drive. Slightly different today. I'm sitting in for Ian Collins because he is unwell and we wish him well. And Kevin will be here for Drive between 4 and 7. So he's coming up in 15 minutes time. But let's get your opinions on the air. This is my show, but well, it's Ian's show, but it's my show today. It's your show too. Let's hear from you. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
I mean, I'm pretty confident this war will end in the coming weeks, certainly by the spring, by the summer.
Okay.
I interpret the various statements by various parties, especially Sergei Lavrov's statement yesterday about the deployment of British and European security guarantee forces. They're not peacekeepers, would be an act of war. I see that as sort of the jousting before or as we go into negotiations. So
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, Donald Trump, within the last hour or so, hour and 20 minutes, has said, based on the fact Russia is absolutely pounding Ukraine on the battlefield right now, I'm strongly considering large-scale banking sanctions and tariffs on Russia until a ceasefire and final settlement agreement on peace is reached. To Russia and Ukraine, get to the table right now before it is too late. Thank you, says Donald Trump with 3 exclamation marks. Well, we know that he is giving a statement in the Oval Office at 4 o'clock. Presumably it's related to that. We no doubt will bring you all the details of that here on Talk. Kevin O'Sullivan will be here in about 10 minutes time on the other side of the 4 o'clock news. In the meantime, let's discuss the stories that we've been discussing today, not least the social media ban, the plan about under 16s being banned from being banned from having smartphones. That plan is there, and Chris Whitty, Sir Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer of this country, is looking into that. Mark is in Carlisle. What do you think of that idea, Mark?
Why should we trust anything that Mark does or says? And he should never be in charge of a review on something to do with our kids. Have you ever tried to prize a phone from a 13-year-old?
Yeah, well, if the law says you've got to prize it, then that's what it's going to do. But you're sceptical about the person doing this review. I mean, he is England's top health official.
Come on. It's all in the mainstream, what was exaggerated, etc., to do with COVID, and he was part of it. Is this his prize for keeping quiet? Anyways, what's the penalty going to be to the 13-year-old who joins social media?
Presumably it would be the parents who would have a penalty, and I mean there are many parents not tech savvy enough who might even not know that their 13-year-old has joined a social media site, for example. They may be blamed for their children's malfeasance.
It'll do more damage than good to the child, to the 13-year-old. That's what I think.
Listen, good points there, Mark. I would extend the conversation, but the line's just not brilliant. But I think we've got the essence of what you're saying there, Mark. Thank you. Joe is in Bournemouth. What do you make of this, Joe? You're very welcome to the programme.
Hello. I just think it's another ridiculous idea. Again, how are you going to police it? I mean, every parent now. The problem is, I was just saying, is that it's getting younger and younger. Children are getting phones given to them.
Yeah.
And even if you're someone who's trying to keep your children from getting a phone, you know, they're left behind by 10. Kids have had phones 2 years.
I know this. Listen, we had this discussion as a family. I discussed this with my brother. My nephew, who's 12, he got a phone when he was 10, and that was the time that his parents thought it was the right time to give him a phone. Obviously, they put loads of restrictions on it. They made sure that he wasn't able to access certain things. But it is a big dilemma for parents, isn't it? And actually, as you say, they're given the phone, but if they're allowed on social media or not. I mean, there's a lot of bad things that can happen simply by them having a phone, and social media is part of it, but it's not all of it.
No, not at all of it. There's actually been some really vicious WhatsApp groups that children have been getting onto, and they're a lot worse.
And the bullying doesn't just stop at the school gate anymore. It's a whole other thing. No. Do you have kids yourself, Joe?
Yeah, I've got two. I've got a 10 and a 14, and this is the thing. Our 14-year-old, obviously, she's on it a lot. We did held strong for quite a while, but once they get hold of it, it's really tricky. We keep them active, but I also see a lot of my little boys' friends on the phone. They're left in rooms. You know, they play a lot of games and they talk via them, and they do have a lot of open conversation. So it's not all bad in some ways.
Yeah.
But it's the amount of time they spend. Like you say, it's really difficult to keep on top of that. You've got to be doing other things. And I think if parents are struggling, working 2 jobs, these kids are just left alone.
And it's an easy thing to do, isn't it, when you're... I mean, I'm not a parent, Joe, but it's an easy thing to say, actually, do you know what? I need to make the dinner, or I need to, do something on the computer, or I need to sort something out, or nip out to the shops or whatever. We'll just allow them to play games for another half an hour.
It's too easy. And the other aspect is that we looked at actually taking a tablet away from our lad, but the problem is he has to have one because the school give their homework on them.
Well, this is part of it as well, Joe. How do you take these things away? Especially, I'm sure, the point I made earlier on about the organisation and the different activities and stuff. I'm sure a lot of that's done on WhatsApp and so on.
Yeah, you can't take one of these devices. A child has to have a device. So again, I don't know how they'll police this new idea, because if you're saying they can't have a phone, then how are they going to do their homework?
Well, this is particularly about social media bans, though. But the point on phones is all part of it, isn't it, Joe?
If you have a phone, they have social media, full stop.
Yeah, it's a very fair point. Listen, thank you for your thoughts on that. Good luck with the parenting, Joe. Sounds as if you're doing a pretty good job to me anyway. Mick is in Bromley, and this ongoing row between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage is what Mick wants to talk about. What do you think will happen here, and whose side are you on, Mick, or are you on either of their sides?
I think it's a great thing what they've just done, the two of them, because... it's like anyone in their job. Once you've been in it for a while, you get a bit stale when you take it for granted. And I think Nigel's been a little bit stale lately. And now Rupert's come up and he's eyeing his job.
Why do you think he's been stale? Why do you think Nigel Farage has been stale?
I just think he hasn't been his usual, he's been out there and rounding the troops up, as it were. I think he's just been sitting on his laurels a little bit lately.
That's interesting. I mean, some people say he's been too hyperactive. He's been in America a lot. He's been anywhere but Parliament sometimes.
It's all right being in America all the time, but you don't see him much here, and he needs to concentrate a bit more in this country on what's going on now. And I think it's like anything, when you're in the job, you get a bit stale, and then once the underling starts having a look at your job and the rumours go, oh, he's after your job, you start getting your back up again. And
so is it maybe good to be threatened in your position, because then you work harder?
Yeah, I think it is in any job. I think it's a good thing. And I wouldn't even be surprised if Rupert set this up just to give him a bit of a G-up, to let him know.
I don't think he set it up, Mick, but very, very interesting thoughts from you, Mick, in Bromley there. Thank you for that. Richard is also in London. Richard, what part of London are you in?
Finsbury Park.
Finsbury Park. I'm heading there tomorrow to see a play, actually. Richard, tell us your thoughts on this.
There's something really interesting going on here, because I think it reveals something about reform. They seem to have this kind of strange, almost fantasy football appeal, and when you encounter them when you encounter their supporters on social media, they go on about the uni party, and there's this sense, Peter, that reform are going to be this magic wand, and they're going to, the problems that that have eluded Britain, like poor growth for 20, 30 years, suddenly they're all going to magically go away. And I think what's going on here is that you've got these two men. Rupert Lowe seems to spend most of his time in Parliament asking endless questions that really nobody takes seriously.
Well, it's a lot of his constituents often say, he's a good MP, he asks a lot of questions, he knows the way Parliament works in a way that maybe some new MPs don't.
I think the problem is you've got to contrast that with someone like Margaret Thatcher, who during the 60s and 70s develops an approach to politics, learning from people like Enoch Powell and Keith Joseph, and a real plan. If we look at politics across even across the world, look at Trump. Yes, he's got many good points, but ultimately what you got here is a bit of a bully. And I think there's a for instance, reform. They kept going on about how there was a botched Brexit deal, but it was Nigel Farage who was saying, "Oh, that Brexit was going to be easy, Peter. That the Germans would."
Although he does
for a trade deal.
Although Richard, he does say that if he was in power, he would sort it out. Quick final call from Chris in Epsom. Chris, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Yeah, hi Peter. Actually, it was me that messaged in earlier that said Lady Sue Carr, with the way she's behaving with the Just Stop Oil
protesters. Yeah,
protesters. I hope she's sitting on the appeals desk for the people with hurty words.
Well,
because,
listen,
they've only put hurty words. They didn't stop traffic or cause damage.
Do you think Just Stop Oil protesters should have their sentences reduced?
I don't know about each one. What they got enough to say.
I must say, Chris, I'm happy for them to spend as much time as possible in prison, because I think they're thugs and criminals. Anyway, listen, thank you. That's Chris in Epsom. Kevin O'Sullivan is here. Kevin, we're having our discussion, but a little earlier than usual.
Yeah, I was just saying to your excellent team, this is all very discombobulating, isn't it? Yes, me for the next 3 hours. I'm sorry to impose that on the audience, but here I am.
It'll be marvellous. What's coming up?
Well, obviously, we'll be looking at this reform situation. The optics are terrible. Anne Widdecombe, who's still a spokesperson for that party, will be coming on at the top of the show to tell us. We'll be looking at that throughout the next 3 hours. Also, we need to talk about two-tier justice. That is a disgrace. These, what? It seems to be part of the pageant now, doesn't it? People get sentenced to, 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, and the next, 5 minutes later they're appealing, and the sentence gets reduced every single time. Why don't we just stop that? You can't appeal against your sentence.
I think you should be